Welcome to Westminster for this BBC News special as the House of Commons sits on a Saturday in emergency session to debate the Prime Minister's new Brexit deal. Well, Boris Johnson went to Parliament to tell MPs that a further delay would be corrosive and that it was time to get Brexit done. But Labour said it could not support a deal which would damage the UK.
And now is the time for this great House of Commons to come together and bring the country together today.
Today's session will last for several hours, at the end of which MPs will decide whether the Prime Minister's deal needs greater scrutiny before it is formally approved.
He has renegotiated the withdrawal agreement and made it even worse. He's renegotiated the political declaration and made that even worse.
It's the first time in 37 years that the Commons is sitting on a Saturday. The result of the main vote on Brexit is on a knife edge, and there's still the possibility that Brexit could be delayed. And as the parliamentary debate goes on, there are thousands of protesters making their way to Westminster, campaigning for a second referendum on the outcome of the Brexit process. We'll bring you the latest from the Palace of Westminster and reaction from around the UK and the rest of the European Union, so stay with us. Yes, welcome to viewers around the UK and indeed around the globe on BBC World for this BBC News special as we follow this historic debate at Westminster where MPs are sitting on a Saturday for the first time since the Falklands conflict back in 1982 to debate the Brexit agreement that Boris Johnson brought back from Brussels earlier this week. All eyes are on the Palace of Westminster, home of the two chambers of the United Kingdom Parliament, where once again the Brexit process, which started over 3 years ago, is proving to be difficult to predict. And even today we could be in a position where MPs do not give a formal yes or no to Boris Johnson's deal. And as we can see, thousands of people congregating around Westminster to make their case for a second referendum. We may hear that debate reflected in the Commons chamber in a short while as well. So let's take a closer look at what is going on in Parliament this afternoon to give you a little bit of a guide. MPs are expected to be voting on the Brexit agreement that the Prime Minister secured with the EU earlier this week. The parliamentary numbers, we know, are extremely tight for the Prime Minister. It's by no means clear that he'll secure the votes needed to pass the motion. In this new deal, the whole of the UK would leave the EU customs union, and this means the UK would be able to strike trade deals with other countries in future. There would be a legal customs border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, but in practice that border would be between Britain and the island of Ireland, with goods being checked at points of entry in Northern Ireland. Let's go straight to the House of Commons. Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, speaking for the first time in public on this debate.
I thought that perhaps consensus had come across the whole of the House and that it had already been decided that this deal would be supported by the House tonight. Unfortunately, my view on that was premature, and I think only premature. But happily for England, of course, it was a reference to Johnny May having scored the first 2 tries in our victory against Australia. I hope the whole House will forgive me if I say that standing here I have a distinct sense of déjà vu.
I know how you feel.
I heard Ian Blackford said what?
But today's vote is an important... Well, I intend to rebel against all of those who don't want to vote to deliver Brexit. Yeah! Mr. Speaker, today's vote is important. The eyes of the country, no, actually the eyes of the wider world are upon us today. And every member in this House has a responsibility in the decision that they will take to determine on whether or not they are going to put the national interest first, and not just an ideological or a single issue or a party political interest, but the full wider interests of our constituents. And as we look at this issue, It is something, the decision we take tonight will determine not just the future of our country and the future lives of our constituents, but I believe the very future of our politics. Yeah. Because we have today to take a key decision, and it's simple. Do we want to deliver Brexit? Do we want to deliver on the result of the referendum in 2016? Well, we know the views of the Scottish Nationalist Party. They reject results of referendum. They had a referendum to stay in the UK. When this House voted overwhelmingly to give the choice of our membership of the EU to the British people, did we really mean it? When we voted to trigger Article 50, did we really mean it? When the two main parties represented in this House stood on manifestos in the 2017 general election to deliver Brexit, did we really mean it? I think there can only be one answer to that, and that is yes, we did mean it. Yes, we keep faith with the British people. Yes, we want to deliver Brexit. Absolutely. Because if the Honourable Lady will just wait for a minute, because if this Parliament did not mean it, then it is guilty of the most egregious con trick on the British people. And there have been many views across this House. I want to say simply to some of the groups involved. There are those, some of whom believe passionately and have believed for some time, others who've come to this more lately, that there should be a second referendum. I say simply this: you cannot have a second referendum simply because some people don't agree with the result of the first. And I don't like. No, there are many people who want to speak, so I'm going to carry on. I've taken many interventions and questions across this House over time.
None have been worth
I don't like referenda. But I think that if you have one, you should abide by the result that people have given you. Then there is the Labour Party front bench. And I've heard much from the Labour Party front bench over the last 3 years about the importance of protecting jobs, of protecting manufacturing, of protecting people's livelihoods. If they really meant that, they would have voted for the deal earlier in this year. And now is their chance to show whether they really care about people by voting for this deal tonight in this afternoon, I hope, Mr. Speaker, in this House of Commons. And then I say to all of those across this House who say they do not want no deal, I've said it before, I've said it many times, I hope this is the last time I have to say it. If you don't want no deal, you have to vote for a deal. Businesses are crying out for certainty. People want certainty in their lives. Investors want to be able to invest and want the uncertainty to be got rid of. They want to know that this country is moving forward. If you want to deliver Brexit, if you want to keep faith with the British people, if you want this country to move forward, then vote for the deal today.
Thank you.
Well, there was a lot of interest, understandably, in that contribution by the former Prime Minister Theresa May, the first time she's spoken in the Commons since she left office a few months ago, and making it quite clear there that, in her view, the result of that referendum back in 2016, although it's 3.5 years ago, must be respected, and that's her line. There was a hint of I suppose, irony there, that Mrs May was reflecting on the fact that clearly this deal is not that different to the deal that she presented to the House several times, and which, of course, the House turned down comprehensively. Laura Kuenssberg, our political editor, is with me. Well, that was an interesting intervention, Laura, and basically Boris Johnson looking up in some admiration and, I suppose, gratitude at Mrs May for the contribution she made.
He certainly did, actually. Almost seemed as if he was turning to her and saying thanks for that, because that's exactly the case that he has been making to MPs since he moved into number 10, is that the public was given a choice. They chose to vote to leave the European Union, and therefore he thinks basically the MPs don't have any excuse but to vote for the deal that he got with the European Union. But he knows full well, opposite the benches in front of him, even some behind him, have still got grave doubts about it. And the vote today is likely to be extremely, extremely close. I don't want to joke around and say it might be 48-52, 52-48 percentage-wise, but it really is that narrow. And of course, that will only happen after they vote on whether or not to delay, even before they get to the final big thumbs up or thumbs down.
So just to help viewers on that, because clearly the choreography is very important here.
Yes.
Before we get to any debate on the actual deal, there will be a vote before that on an amendment by Sir Oliver Letwin, which
right.
in effect has the purpose of, I suppose, delaying the process a little more so that MPs can have more time to scrutinise.
That's right, and it essentially, according to number 10, makes what should be a meaningful vote that would legally say, yes, we accept this deal, yes, we're leaving at Halloween, into a meaningless vote. Now, what the actual proposal is to say to the government, well, we might quite like your deal, but we're not going to give it legal force until all of the laws that actually would bring it into force have also passed through the House of Commons. Now, that's a process that would probably take 10 days or so, and it's basically setting a much higher bar for the government, because it's one thing for Boris Johnson to get MPs over the line to say, yeah, your deal's fine, let's push ahead. It's another thing to get them to say, yes, your deal is fine, let's push ahead, but we also agree with every single tiny detail of all the new laws that have to be brought in actually to give effect to our departure from the European Union. So MPs, if you like, they've moved the goalposts.
Let's be clear, what if they vote for the Letwin amendment? What then happens to the main motion that Mr Johnson wants passed?
Well, if MPs vote to delay this insurance policy that Oliver Letwin wants to put forward, the government cannot cancel the vote later on. They can't pull the motion, as it's known. That will happen. But what Downing Street sources have told me this morning is what they plan to do in that case is basically to say to their MPs, go home. This is a farce. There's no point continuing, because what Parliament has shown this morning is that all they're interested in is having another delay, moving the goalposts, making it even harder. So that first result on that Letwin amendment will have a huge impact on the rest of the course of the day. If that happens, the government's plan is then to bring that bill, all of the legislation that has to go through to make this happen, to Parliament on Monday, and to make what was going to be Super Saturday into a decisive vote on Tuesday. Try again Tuesday, Torture Tuesday, whatever you want to call it. But this really does hang on this first vote. If that is clearly enough explained, I don't know, we're doing our best, aren't we?
It's clear, Laura, thank you. And I'm just wondering, how realistic is it then to bring that huge block of stuff forward in a few days?
Well, here's the thing. Laws going through Parliament have got lots of different stages. The vote on Tuesday would be on what's called the second reading, and that is before you'd be into all the really complicated guts of it. So at that point, the government does believe they could get a legally binding, well, not quite binding, but more broad brush, a legally binding decision from the House of Commons to say, yes, this is going to happen. Because, of course, as a lot of our viewers will know, the risk is once laws start going through Parliament, MPs can then helpfully put down their own suggestions and have votes on all sorts of things, and it makes it very hard to wrangle and hard to predict, as this whole process has been.
I'm going to let you go in a second, because I know you're to say the least, busy today. When can we expect some kind of vote to come forward? What's your sense of the timings here?
Round about 2:30,
Right.
so in about an hour's time, but it could run a bit longer, and there is no official cut-off date, so you know, we'll be here for as long as we need to be here. The thing to look out for, though, is Michael Gove, who is the Prime Minister's sort of effective deputy. He will be the one who's winding up for the government, probably winding another lot of people up too, but he'll be the one closing the debate for the government. So as soon as you see Michael Gove on his feet at the dispatch box, then we're into the sort of finale before the vote starts.
Good to talk to you, Laura, again. Thanks very much. We'll see you later on.
Yeah.
Laura Kuenssberg, our political editor. You can see behind me plenty of protesters, because this has been a familiar feature, of course, in Westminster over recent months. Not just those people who are in favour of another referendum, which is the purpose of today's big march and big demonstration, but also, of course, those people who are very angry about the fact that Brexit still hasn't been delivered. So we've heard those voices over the previous months, and they are represented here at Westminster again today, though this big march we're looking at is all to do with what they call a people's vote. It is all to do with calling a second referendum on whatever the deal is passed or not today. So, you know, that's a different kind of proposition that people are marching on today, and we'll talk about that a little more later on. I mentioned at the start of the programme here that, of course, we are broadcasting around the UK, but also throughout the world on BBC World. and lots of eyes in Brussels on what is happening today in the House of Commons, given the summit we were attending just a few days ago, and I was there with my colleague Katja Adler discussing the outcome of that summit, and Katja joins us now. So, Katja, we are still not certain what's going to be happening at the end of this debate. We're still not certain whether Boris Johnson will get the vote he needs. And we were discussing earlier this week about the readiness, or lack of it, among European leaders to allow this process to drag on even more. And your suggestion then was that they would not shut the door. Is that still your view today?
Yes, it is my view, Hugh. I think that it's not just, you said all eyes are on Brussels or on Parliament today. All eyes across the European Union, whichever radio station I was tuning into this morning, everybody, Germany, France, the Netherlands, everybody is looking at Parliament today to see what happens. 3 years of Brexit process and the EU is fatigued. They want now, as they tried at the time with Theresa May, to encourage MPs to focus their minds on the Brexit deal in front of them. They say it's the end of the negotiating line for them in the EU, that's what they say, and therefore they've been very coy about the idea of granting another Brexit extension in order to keep that pressure on Parliament. But, Hugh, it is very difficult to see the same EU that's now made 2 Brexit deals with 2 different UK Prime Ministers suddenly turning around and saying, you know what, we've had enough, we're going to close the door in the UK's face. And why? Well, mainly out of self-interest. EU leaders have always tried to avoid a no-deal Brexit. If they refuse an extension and there is no deal, that is what they would be walking themselves and their economies into, and they're extremely unlikely to do that. But for now, they are watching the vote and worrying about the future, because may I just point out here that this leaving process was supposed to be the easy bit, because then comes the whole idea of trade negotiations if this deal is passed, and they will be complex and they could take a very long time.
Katja, I'm going to pause there a second. I'll come back to you in a short while, because I want to go into the Commons, where the father of the House, the senior Conservative Ken Clarke, is speaking, the former Chancellor. Let's listen to him.
Down the Irish Sea, because there's absolutely no doubt there's quite a clear customs and regulatory border being envisaged down the Irish Sea. It has to be said that the effect is to save the all-Irish economy from the near calamity that a total no deal would have resulted in. I have no idea how anybody would have operated a no-deal situation across the border, and I thought these weird propositions of a customs border somewhere in Northern Ireland but not on the border had little or no chance of working. But although the Irish at least have the economic consolation that they will sail on through the transition period as they are now, I'm extremely worried that the purpose of going to negotiate this convoluted arrangement over Ireland was so that the economy of Britain could be taken out of the customs union and the single market straight away. And if that holds after the transition period, I think that will have the most damaging effects on our economic future for all the reasons that other people have given in the earlier and lengthy speeches we've had. Now, therefore, it's all to be played for in this transition period. I actually do not believe that a good free trade agreement, a good agreement on security, fighting international crime, agreements on the licensing of medicines, the possible arrangements with the European Medicines Agency, all the things spelt out, are likely to be achieved by the end of next year. The Canada deal, which a lot of Brexiteers like to hold up as a model, took about 9 years before that was put in place. So I do wish that we prepare to contemplate a more realistic timescale. But meanwhile, I think the votes today and the process the next week or two have got to get us through the necessary process to put in place a withdrawal agreement, so we have a transition period in which we can have the full negotiations about the ultimate destination. And all my votes in this House personally have been to ensure the calamity of leaving with no deal on the 31st of October or whenever was never allowed to happen. For that reason, I think we should support this deal. I cannot understand the government's resistance to saying that of course, we should legislate before we abandon the protection of the Benn Act and decide we don't need an extension. The government says, oh, you can take that for granted, the detail, getting the votes. We all know that none of us are sure whether there's a majority for this government at all, for the present deal today. If they can keep it through the whole of the legislation, I shall be very reassured. I'd like to wait to see that they can.
More grateful than ever before to the Right Honourable and learned gentleman. The 5-minute limit still applies.
The former Chancellor, the former Home Secretary, the father of the House, the most senior member of the House of Commons, Kenneth Clarke, who's been a Member of Parliament since 1970, always listened to with great respect, but of course someone who has massive reservations about the Brexit process itself, making his case. Let's just show you what's going on outside the Palace of Westminster, because there's the scene for you. Congregating around Parliament Square. We can just see the corner of Whitehall there, and the Treasury and the Foreign Office on the other corner of Parliament Square, and you just see the Palace of Westminster in the foreground with all the scaffolding, because of course there's a big renovation programme which is getting underway at the Palace of Westminster, which is to cost between £3 and £6 billion and will take a decade or more to achieve. But looking on this vast crowd, and you can see lots of EU flags, because this crowd is all about demanding a second referendum on whatever the deal is that comes out of Parliament. And today's debate, of course, is all about the shape of the deal that was negotiated in Brussels just a few days ago. So back to Brussels, and Katja Adler, who is our Europe editor. Just another thought, Katja, from you on what happens in terms of the European leaders themselves. If there is no outcome to this parliamentary process today, what do they have up their sleeves in terms of contingency?
It's not about contingency, because don't forget that, this deadline that Boris Johnson set for achieving a Brexit deal, the deadline that also appears now in the Benn Act, which says if no deal is made with the EU and then agreed on, he should ask for another Brexit extension. That deadline is not an EU deadline, it is a UK deadline. Under EU law, the current Brexit deadline, where the UK would leave the EU automatically under EU law, is the end of this month. So at the moment, the EU finds itself again in the position of watching and waiting to see what happens in the UK. What they still have to do on this side is to give the go-ahead to the European Parliament to say yes to this new Brexit deal. It has a veto, along with our Parliament as well, but it's not thought or expected to make any trouble, if you like, because the European Commission, the building which you see behind me, where all those negotiations took place, has been very careful to keep Parliament in the loop and updated all the time. And now that every single one of the 27 EU leaders have said, yes, we're happy with this Brexit deal, it certainly respects all of our red lines, the European Parliament is unexpected to make any trouble. And therefore the EU waits to see what Parliament decides. Will this deal be given the go-ahead? The EU would like it to, if Brexit is going to take place, so they can just move on now with the next process, move on with a transition period, a standstill period after Brexit takes place, when negotiations start about a new trade deal between the EU and the UK, a new security relationship with the EU and the UK, and the pressure is tight because the current transition only lasts for 14 months. If you think how long this Brexit process, the leaving process, has taken us, and it's not over yet, is it realistic that the trade deal can be done in 14 months? That is the next big worry for the European Union.
Katja, many thanks once again. Katja Adler there for us in Brussels. I want to jump into the Commons straight away for Sammy Wilson of the DUP. Let's listen.
Says that any controversial issue has to be decided by a cross-community vote. That part of the Belfast Agreement, which is so sacrosanct in this House and to those who negotiate it, has now been torn out of the Belfast Agreement and will give way.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, and he's making his own powerful argument, which we have heard. Could I ask him, in the limited time available, that he turns his attention and addresses the amendment made by my right honourable friend for Dorset West? Because if he's concerned about a hard border, Mr. Speaker, he must recognise that the door may be opening, if that passes today, for a hard border and no-deal Brexit to emerge.
Well, I mean, first of all, the hard border is there. And, I've made the argument, and I defy anybody to tell me that if you've got to fill in a customs declaration, you've got to have lorries and vans searched at the ports coming into to Northern Ireland, you've got to pay taxes on goods which come from GB, that's not a hard border already. And we will. And let me come to this issue of consent, because it's important. Because the Minister dismisses unionist fears by saying you can vote your way out of it. Well, of course, the mechanism for voting our way out of it is laid down by an international treaty. Why is that not going to be adhered to? Because the government and the EU and the Irish government knows that would be an effective way of Northern Ireland doing the very thing that the Minister has said we'll be able to do. Remove that, and you remove the ability of Northern Ireland to take itself out of this arrangement. And of course, we only get the chance after 4 years. We're put into it without any consent at all.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Would my honourable friend agree with me?
Sammy Wilson of the Democratic Unionist Party, the bloc of MPs who have been actually in parliamentary alliance with the Conservatives in recent years, but clearly very, very opposed, as they have made clear repeatedly, very opposed to this deal going ahead. And Sammy Wilson there making a forceful point in his usual style about his sense of what a hard border is and why this deal, in his view, this Boris Johnson deal, is far worse than Theresa May's deal, and they weren't keen on that. So they're in a worse position today than they were then, in their view. Let's go over to the Palace of Westminster, because Vicky Young is there in the central lobby with one of the guests, one senior Conservative, I think. Vicky, yes?
Yeah, that's right. Now, everyone here, as you can imagine, running round, trying to do the maths, trying to work out whether Oliver Letwin's amendment might get through, which could effectively scupper the chance of a meaningful vote happening later today. There are lots of angry Conservatives here. Some of them feel that those who went to court to secure a meaningful vote are now trying to stop it. Of course, the other side of the argument is that there are many who do not trust the government. They don't trust some in the Tory party. They are worried that if the deal is voted through today, you then get to the legislation which has to get through in the next couple of weeks. That could well be voted down, and then we leave without a deal, which is what many are trying to stop. Let's speak now to Nigel Evans, senior Conservative MP. You are in the opposite camp to Sammy Wilson on this from the DUP, who we've just been hearing from, because you think this is a better deal, do you, than Theresa May's?
Yeah, it gets rid of the backstop for a start, and then we're out of the customs union, single market, not being justiciable by the courts. We'll be controlling our own immigration. You're right, though. Listen, I've been in the chamber for most of this morning and this afternoon, and I'm amazed we can see one another for all the smoke screens that are being utilised in order for people to justify why, when they've said they couldn't possibly support a no-deal exit, now all of a sudden they don't want this deal either. And Theresa May made a very powerful intervention, the first time she's spoken in a speech, I think, since she quit being Prime Minister. And she said, basically, the eyes of the world are upon us. Our voters are looking at us, and they're saying, you promised us this referendum, you promised us in the general election you would fulfill it, and can we trust you? And I think that's what this is going to be about today at the end of it, is can the voters actually trust us to deliver what we want? And you've mentioned Oliver Letwin's amendment.
I'm just going to quickly, because people might not be following this closely. Oliver Letwin's amendment says this House has considered the matter of the deal and withholds its approval until any legislation gets through. What is wrong with that?
Because basically it would mean that they could carry on talking for the next 6 months on the aspects of any legislation that needs to be there. I got elected in 1992, and one of the first bits of legislation that I did was the Maastricht Treaty. We sat through the night in order to get that legislation through. I'm not saying it was the cleverest thing as far as working hours and all that sort of stuff is concerned, but we knew that there was urgency because we needed to get that legislation through. We can do exactly the same here. We're sitting here on a Saturday. I've been an MP for 28 years. I've never sat on a Saturday before, ever. This is the first time since 1982. So let's sit on Saturdays. Let's sit on Sundays. Let's meet at 8 a.m. Let's not finish till 10 p.m. We can get that legislation through.
Their argument is that once the deal has been approved, if it were to be today, that means that then the Ben Act, which says that the Prime Minister has to ask ask for a delay. That doesn't happen. We then move next week to start debating the legislation. What if that legislation is voted down by maybe some of your colleagues who really secretly don't like the deal? Then we would leave without a deal at the end of October.
Yeah, we haven't got the numbers for that, because what you will find then is that the Labour Party and the vast majority of Conservatives would actually vote for the deal. Also, I went to the Brexit supporting Tory ERG group meeting this morning at 8:30. And it was announced there by Steve Baker and Mark Francois, and Mark Francois himself has said it in the chamber, that we will support, therefore, all the legislation that follows from that. So they've given a commitment.
That's the problem. There's no trust in this place anymore.
The ERG would be well outvoted if they tried any shenanigans like that. Now, the only shenanigans that are being tried in the chamber is to try and prevent or delay Brexit from happening. And I think after having debated this for 3.5 years, after having extension after extension, the last thing that anybody in this country now wants is another extension until the 31st of January, when we could then get another extension. They just want to carry on talking. The last thing that people like Dominic Grieve and a few of the others there in Parliament want is for us to come to a decision. Today, they've got that opportunity.
What do you think might happen? I mean, the numbers look incredibly close, don't they? I mean, I think privately, Downing Street might have thought they had the numbers for getting approval for the deal, but of course this Oliver Letwin amendment could change everything. Yeah, it's way tight. I've been receiving messages today from Singapore through to the United States of America. The eyes of the world really are on us today. And people have been asking me, what's going to happen? I really do not know. I know the whips are talking to a lot of MPs. They will have the figures, I'm absolutely certain. The thing is all going to come down in the end to how many Labour MPs representing Leave constituencies who are now looking at this deal and thinking, I'm being scrutinised by my voters. I will have to justify to them why I have failed to vote for this deal, this Brexit deal that's on offer. And so the speculation that there may be 15 of them that are prepared to come over, if that's the case, it's going to be incredibly tight, but the government just might get it over the post today if that's true. Okay, Nigel Evans, thank you very much indeed. So that really is the speculation, of course, that everyone is indulging in here. I think the one thing we can say for sure is it will be closer than any of the other votes that we've had on a withdrawal deal.
Vicky, thanks very much, and thanks to Nigel Evans as well there for views on what might happen. What I'd like to do now outside here is to introduce my panel for the next hour or so. Very kindly joining us, Anand Menon from the UK in Changing Europe. We have Dawn Foster from The Guardian, and we have Katie Bowles, who's Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator. You've been waiting very patiently to talk to us. Thank you for joining us today. All three of you, seasoned observers, all three of you have been following every twist and turn of this. And I'm going to start in the middle with Anand on this debate, okay? Today, lots of people consider it to be, something that is rather difficult to follow in terms of not just the parliamentary procedure, but precisely what Boris Johnson has brought back, which Theresa May did or didn't do. How much difference is there? What are we talking about in terms of this deal that is so different to the one that MPs rejected in massive numbers just a few months ago? What's your answer to that?
I think there are real differences between the two. The most obvious and perhaps most politically important is that the backstop has gone. Now, critics will argue it's been replaced by a front stop, which means that actually what the deal does is puts Northern Ireland in a different situation vis-à-vis the EU to the rest of the United Kingdom. The reason why Boris Johnson has secured the support of the ERG in a way that Mrs May never managed to,
the very fervent
the European
Brexiteers,
Research Group of Conservative MPs, is that the reason he shelved the backstop is because he can promise a far looser relationship with the European Union going forward than Mrs May was offering. And I think that's why that half of the party is reconciled to what he's trying to do. There's always a flip side with Brexit, and the flip side is that those who prefer a softer sort of Brexit don't like what they're seeing. We heard Ken Clarke a minute ago saying this is a bad deal. He's concerned about the economic implications of a looser relationship with the EU.
And Katie, we heard there from the DUP again, we've heard from lots of them today, who are clearly very unhappy with the shape of this deal. They feel they've been let down, and they feel indeed that this is a much worse position to be in than the deal that Mrs May delivered. What are you hearing from them, and what do you think the likely impact of that is going to be on today's events?
Yeah, well, the DUP weren't happy with either offer, Theresa May's or Boris Johnson's. I think particularly with Boris Johnson, there's a lot of anger in the DUP because they feel as though he made promises to them, some at their own annual party conference, on various visits to them, when he was trying to be the Prime Minister, the next Tory leader, and they think he has rode back on them. Now, there are some cabinet ministers I've spoken today who still think perhaps we can get the DUP back on side. I think anyone who's been watching what the DUP MPs have been saying in the Parliament today thinks that's probably very unlikely, and it does make it hard to pass the deal, because for every DUP MP you don't have, you need another Labour MP.
We're going to pause for a second, and Dawn, I'll come back to you as well, because I want to go into the Commons. Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General, on his feet. Let's listen to this.
I remain of the view that if one looks at its detail in terms of the likely negotiating process that will have to take place next year, I am left in very serious doubt that it will in fact be possible to achieve a free trade agreement, and that therefore this House will be confronted in 12 months' time with very similar challenges to the ones that we face at present, and with deep economic consequences if we can't find a way through them. So I'm afraid I am not enthusiastic about the deal. I was listening to my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, who's been very consistent in her view on the issue of Brexit. Namely, that for us as a House, or MPs, to both offer a referendum and then try to thwart it by our own actions or reject it is a con trick. And I don't disagree with her about that, although we have this disagreement, and yet I don't believe that it is in any way a con trick when one finds oneself ending up with something so utterly different from what was being offered. I don't see anything wrong in going back and asking the electorate whether that is what they really want. And I remain of the view that that possibility exists, and if it were to be a majority view of the House that it should be done, I would support it and seek to have that carried out, because I think the consequences are so momentous. But I'd also like to make clear to the Prime Minister that if that were to fail, I would not seek to oppose leaving on these terms. I want to make that quite clear. We've got to resolve this. But that then brings me to the amendment of my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset. It is frankly extraordinary that a government that says it wants to follow a sensible process then seeks to railroad that process in a way that makes it likely that proper debate will not take place. And to that I profoundly object, and for that reason I will support that amendment, and anybody in this House who wants an orderly form of Brexit should do so as well.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will be voting.
So that was Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General, Conservative MP. And I'm going to stay in the House because Hilary Benn, the chairman of the Brexit Select Committee, now on his feet. Let's join him.
So far is this, that the deal the Prime Minister has brought back will give us less good access to our biggest, nearest and most important market than we enjoy today, and less good access than the deal negotiated by the former Prime Minister would have given. And I cannot understand why anyone should regard that as something to be celebrated, cheered or recommended. It is no wonder the government does not want to do an economic assessment, because it would show what the government's last economic assessment shows. And I thought it was very striking as my right honourable friend, in his typically forensic and eloquent way, told the House what it would mean in practice to watch the euphoria that was evident on the benches opposite earlier give way to cold realisation of what it will mean for the businesses and industries that we represent in our constituencies. And I simply ask the question, Mr. Speaker, why would we want to undermine our future economy, investment, opportunity and potential in this way? The second point I want to make is about consent. Because the Prime Minister was right in asking us how are we going to heal the rift that Brexit has created. If this deal is defeated today, it will be the fourth time in which the House has been unable to agree a way forward. And I am the first to admit that we cannot carry on like this. We need to find a way forward, and that is why a way of doing so has been offered in a very prescient intervention a year ago by my honourable friends, the members for Hove and Sedgefield, with their compromise proposal. And it is a compromise because there is in politics a division between those who advocate if we can't get a deal, we leave with no deal, And on the other hand, those who say, let's just cancel the result of the referendum, pretend it never happened. Now, I do not subscribe to either of those views. The compromise is to say there is a way in which we can get this done and achieve a decision, and that is by asking the British people. And at the heart of that question is this: do the British people have the right to change their minds?
Yep.
Now, I fear that some people who reject a referendum would cry, no, they don't. We had the one vote and that's it. I disagree with that view, because it is fundamental to our democracy that when the facts change, events change, or time passes, we should have the opportunity to change our minds if we wish. I do not know what the answer to that question is. The only people who know are the British people, and that is why I will vote for my honourable friend's amendment today, because I think we should ask the people what they now want.
The senior Labour MP, Hilary Benn, who is chairman of the Brexit Select Committee. Let's come back out of the Commons and join my panel once again. Just to pick up on where we were, just the point that you were making there, Katie, before I come to Dawn, about the role of the Democratic Unionist Party and the way that that has affected this process, given the New Deal. Just your thoughts on how that will impact on today's proceedings and the kind of calculations that the Conservative whips are now making, given that the DUP is clearly not on board.
Well, they need a significant number more of Labour MPs now to back this deal. And I think that there is a sense in government that they're quite happy with what's happened this morning with the European Research Group, the Eurosceptic Tory MPs, because it seems wholesale the majority of that group have now come on, and that means that's good news for them. But if this is to have any chance of passing, they have to get more Labour MPs, and at the moment it seems we're in the 12-13 mark, and I think it does need to go up somewhat. Also looking at independent MPs.
So on that point, Dawn, what are you picking up in terms of what the Labour whips are kind of calculating? Nigel Evans, who is a Conservative, obviously, but will know lots of his parliamentary colleagues, suggesting there may be 15 Labour MPs who are prepared to back this deal. Katie, they're suggesting it may even need to be more than that if they're to get it through. What is your reading of the potential Labour rebellion on this?
I think most people were expecting more, so the Conservatives were briefing that they thought they could pick up 19 easily at some point. They were quite confident, but as Katie says, you know, the second that you lost those 10 DUP MPs, the Conservatives had to be really, really firm, bringing people on side. And Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell spent almost all of last night calling round Labour MPs who might be considering rebelling, trying to bring them back on side, and it looked as if the Labour rebellion is actually going to be a lot smaller than they expected.
Ah, that's interesting. So, I mean, again, it's difficult to foresee, I know, but do you think it could be considerably less than 12 then at the end of it, or not? Or do you think that there are 10 or more who are determined to vote for the deal?
I think 11 have come out firmly now and said that they will, so I still think that, you know, 12, 13 is probably the highest we're looking at.
And if that's the case, what does that mean, do you think, for the overall calculation?
The overall calculations, then, I think this could lose by a very, very small handful. We're looking at single figures. We could have a massive upset in the Commons when that happens, and I think the Let Win amendment will then pass.
So, if that happens, let's say, and you know, if the Let Win amendment that we've been describing, the one that calls for more scrutiny and in effect delays the process, if that passes, where are we in the process at that point?
Well, by 11 o'clock tonight, the Prime Minister is committed by law to write to Brussels and request an extension. I'm one of those people who thinks it's very unlikely that they will say no. It's conceivable they might come back with a different date, but I think even that's unlikely because they know that leaves them open to a parliamentary debate. And then, in a sense, we're almost back where we were under Theresa May. We have a deal on the table that Parliament hasn't voted for, an extension upcoming. I suspect Boris Johnson will try and bring his deal back to Parliament, partly because he thinks he might get it through, partly because the optics are good for him. If there's going to be a general election, he can say, look, I kept trying, get me a Parliament that will put it through.
We're in a bizarre position, Katie, aren't we, really, today, because we're all saying, look at this historic day in the Commons, the first time they're sitting on a Saturday for 37 years, because they are going to make the big decision on Brexit. That's the reason everyone is here. And what we're now saying is, actually, they might not.
Yeah, as often is the case when we say it's a crunch Brexit vote, it could be that it's not actually that much crunch. If the Letwin Amendment passes, there's some talk that Conservative MPs will be told to abstain on the next vote. So it won't actually give us any real bearing, I suppose, on whether or not Boris Johnson has a majority for his Brexit deal. Then that will be delayed till next week, and we are hearing that if this does happen, then perhaps Tuesday will be the next time we all gather here and say it's a really important vote. But there is some delay, but again, I think that Boris Johnson wants to pass the Brexit deal. He thinks that he can perhaps scrape a majority, and if he can't do it today, he will push for it this week coming, so it won't be over.
So you're saying we might have our own version of Super Tuesday as opposed to the US version, yes? Coming up next week. Can we pause there for a second? Because we've had some really good thoughts from all of you, so stay with us. The time is... It's 2 o'clock here at Westminster, and welcome to viewers around the UK and indeed around the world on BBC World News. We are here for this BBC News special. We are following the events in the Houses of Parliament today. It is the first time in nearly 40 years that MPs have sat on a Saturday, and they are doing so to consider the deal that Boris Johnson struck with the European Union earlier this week in Brussels. A lot of debate about the quality of the deal that he's brought back. Lots of people saying that it's actually not as good as the deal that Theresa May struck earlier this year, which of course MPs rejected in record numbers. So that's part of the debate today. And then throwing into this the complication into the parliamentary process that there might be an amendment which forces Parliament in any case to tell the Prime Minister to extend a little further so that the legislation can be scrutinised in rather more detail. So this process today is not quite as straightforward as some people had foreseen, and I have to say, in this long Brexit saga, that shouldn't surprise anyone at all. Let's have a look outside the chamber, because we have thousands of people congregating on Westminster. There we have the great buildings in Whitehall, the Foreign Office and the Treasury just there on the right-hand side, and just behind it, the tiny street, Downing Street, which is backing onto Horse Guards Parade, that vast open expanse that we can see bottom right of frame there, where we have all the big state events, including Trooping the Colour, and then Whitehall there to the left, and this leading up towards, the cameras leading us up towards Trafalgar Square, Admiralty Arch there, which leads down to Buckingham Palace, and Nelson's Column there dominating Trafalgar Square. So this crowd of many thousands, having congregated on central London, they are demanding the right to have a second referendum on the outcome of the Brexit process. They want what they call a people's vote. So this is the picture right now, live in central London, as Parliament is in session on a Saturday and as thousands of people are congregating on Westminster itself. And I should say, of course, that you have people here who are very much in favour of Brexit, and you have people who are very much against it. Those views are reflected around this area today, as they have been for the last few months. What I'd like to do now is to move away from Westminster for a second and go to Bury in Greater Manchester, which did vote to leave in the 2016 referendum by just over 54%, so slightly more than the national figure. What do voters there make of what they are seeing in Parliament today? Now, our correspondent Andy Gill is there with some of them, so let's join Andy now.
Yes, as you say, Hugh, Bury, leave voting constituency. We've got Lauren here, who voted Remain but might now accept leave. Martin and Jane, who voted Remain but might have different views on what should happen now. And David here, who voted leave. David, if I can start with you. The MPs are still talking. Right. What would you like to see happen today?
Well, I'd like to see the UK leave the EU. The reason being that I'd like to see or hope that it would create more jobs and an improvement in manufacturing and industry within the UK. You know,
a lot of people think that leaving would do the opposite.
I don't think so personally, but that's only my view. But at the end of the day, I was hoping that there'd be a lot less unemployment and things, you know, would improve within the UK.
Would you like to see the Commons pass Mr Johnson's deal?
Well, I'm not familiar with exactly what his deal is, but I'd voted leave in the first place, and I haven't changed my opinion at all. I still want to leave.
OK. Jane, you voted Remain. What would you like to happen now?
I'm not sure what. I think they need to sort it out one way or another. I don't think this deal that Boris has put on the table is any better than what Theresa May put on the table. So I don't trust him anyway, so I don't see how he's going to get everything sorted out. I don't know, it's going to take a lot more time, but I just don't know how that's all going to
So not pass Mr Johnson's deal today, yet more time I mean, some people say, get it over with. We've been doing it for 3 years.
Yeah, get it over with, and then what? Then what? You know, when there's no staff in the hospitals, you know, there's no food in the supermarkets, you know, you can't just say get it over with and then deal with whatever happens after that.
Okay. Martin, what do you think? What should happen today? Would you like to happen today?
I mean, it is an incredibly complex situation. I think, for me, I'd probably go with a bad deal being better than no deal. I would go for us getting out, because I think we have to, even though I vote to remain, I think we have to honour the original deal, and democracy has to take precedence over everything else. And I think we can then move on. We can hold the government accountable for the mess that they've created and their failure over the last 3 years to sort it, head for an election and move on as a country from there.
But you'd like to see the Commons pass Mr Johnson's deal today?
Like's probably too strong a word, but I would accept that, and I think that's probably in the national interest.
Okay. Lauren, you voted Remain, but might now accept Leave?
Well, like Martin, yes, I think that it should be resolved one way or another. I ideally would like us to have a deal, but think that we should potentially be ready to leave without a deal because we have to uphold the original vote.
You're not worried about the warnings that some people, manufacturers, car makers, have put out about no deal?
Yeah, very concerned, but we obviously had the vote and I think we have to stand by it. I didn't particularly want to leave the EU, but I think obviously we have to honour the vote, and that's where we are. And personally, I think a deal would be better than no deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, all right. Thank you all very much for your opinions. That's what some people here in Bury are thinking about today's vote.
Andy, thank you very much, and thanks to your guests there too in Bury. Back here at Westminster, my colleague Laura Kuensberg, the BBC's political editor, just putting out on social media that she's been told that Number 10 is saying that the chances of no deal, a no-deal Brexit, will increase, will go up, if the Letwin Amendment passes. This is the amendment we've been talking about, the one that basically enforces another delay because of the need for more scrutiny. I'm trying to summarise it. The government will step up no-deal preparations immediately, as the risks will have increased substantially. If Letwin defeated and the deal is approved, well, no-deal preparations will start being turned off immediately. So that's the message that Laura's getting from Number 10. Let's talk to someone who knows this process in great detail, who served as Brexit Secretary, and that is the Conservative MP, David Davis. Thanks for joining us, David. Where are we today in your assessment with this debate? What is your sense of the temperature and the mood of the Commons as we approach a really important set of votes?
Well, to say the obvious, it's on a knife edge, of course. It's very, very fine. So calling the outcome is going to be pretty difficult. The vote will be at 5:30, I think. I think the balance of probabilities is that Letwin will not get through.
Right. Why do you think that?
Well, in essence, those who are voting for the Letwin proposal are really voting against Brexit. That's what it amounts to.
I mean, lots of them would say no to that.
Well, of course they are, but you know, he's all the way through this process. He's argued for meaningful votes. Why? So that the Commons can actually look at the deal and say yes or no. Well, now Mr. Letwin won't take yes for an answer. If he doesn't want no deal, this is a deal, and it's the best deal you're likely to get. And I say that as an ex-Brexit negotiator. This is the best deal Boris could have got. So I think Number 10, unfortunately, are right to increase no-deal preparation if Letwin wins. But I think the balance probably is he won't win, and that we will just squeak through by a couple of votes.
Right. Well, that's interesting because you know, we get different versions, obviously.
I mean, the thing about it, I mean, you ask about the mood. This is one of those rare occasions when the debate in the chamber may move the day.
Okay.
That doesn't normally happen. Mostly these things are pretty much set in advance. This is one where somebody could make a really persuasive speech and move 10 people.
Given that the DUP are still, you know, sounding pretty negative about this. I'm told that Nigel Dodds was seen with the Prime Minister's PPS a short while ago. Maybe they're still having a chat, but you know, so far they're pretty negative. Which obviously means the Prime Minister needs quite a few Labour MPs to come on board. Now, what is your sense of the possibility of that? Getting, let's say, 12 or 15 or more?
Well, those Labour quite reasonably good, I think. Those Labour MPs. I mean, this is D-Day. This is the decision day in all of this. Those Labour MPs may have been able to sort of stand back behind their party for a long while. Those with large Leave votes in their own constituencies, and not be too obvious about blocking the process. Now, today, there is a deal on the table. So either you want this deal, or you want no deal, or you want to stop the whole Brexit process. And I don't think many Labour MPs want to answer those 2-second questions. Do you want no deal or do you want to stop the process? So I think there's a decent chance. I also think, I mean, look, I have every sympathy. I've spent more time worrying about Northern Ireland than most English members of Parliament. And I would sympathise with the DUP's position. They back, or the unionists that they represent back at the time of the Belfast Agreement, gave up the rights of the majority to the minority. They said, you've got a veto. Now they're the minority, they've been asked to give up their veto. So you can understand how they feel about that. But my message to them is, okay, abstain. And if they abstain, I think that will tip the balance, and they'll be able to turn around to the people and say, we didn't support this deal, but neither did we stand in the way of the United Kingdom having a good future.
There'll be viewers watching saying, hang on a second, what's wrong with the House of Commons saying we want all the legislation passed and looked at before we give formal approval? Doesn't that sound like common sense?
Well, two things. I mean, firstly, the people who are supporting the Letwin Agreement set today as a deadline. They set today as a deadline. You know, that's why I say they won't take yes for an answer. We've met the deadline, we've provided a deal, and now they're changing the terms of the agreement. The basis of argument is, Mr. Letwin's saying basically he doesn't trust some members of the Tory party. They might overturn this legislation. Oh, wait a minute. 3/4 of the House of Commons are Remainers. There are only 162 people in the House of Commons who voted to leave. They don't have it in their power to stop this process and force a no deal. So, you know, it's a bogus argument, and it's based on a bogus analysis. And they should say yes for an answer, do what they implied they would do when they kept saying, we respect the result, we respect the referendum. Well, respect it and vote for the deal.
Final point, David, if I may, because this is also to do with Northern Ireland, but it's to do with the quality of the deal. And, you know, given your deep involvement at one stage in the negotiations as well, this is a very important question. You know, there are colleagues of yours saying this actually is a worse deal than the one that Theresa May brought back, which MPs rejected very, very forcefully. And for that reason alone, people should be sceptical about it. What is your view on the difference between the two sets of deals? And is this, in your view, a deal which is honestly better than the one that Mrs May negotiated?
Yeah. Well, remember, I resigned over an early version of Mrs May's deal. First thing to say is, there are 8 differences. I won't list them all for you, but the key ones from Northern Ireland's point of view are the question of the border in the Irish Sea. Many years ago, you may just remember, there was the mad cow crisis. I was the Europe Minister in those days. I remember vividly Ian Paisley Sr. being the man who said, I want English cows inspected in Belfast before they come into Northern Ireland. When, as a practical reality, the DUP looked to the common sense outcome. So we've already got an inspection procedure. It's almost invisible. And that's what we're going to do with the rest of this. Make it almost invisible. If I'm selling 1,000 refrigerators to Northern Ireland and they're only going to Northern Ireland, it should go with almost no visible effect at all. If I want half of them to be sold in the south, then right enough, it should have a customs check. And the only difference is that customs check's going to take place probably in Liverpool or Stranraer or Holyhead rather than in Belfast itself. And that's proper. If we do a good deal, a good final deal, future economic partnership deal, with no tariffs, no quotas, and minimal regulatory checks, which is what we'll be aiming for, it will make this almost entirely invisible, this project. And that's what we're aiming for.
Just bear with me a second, David, because I think we have some social media from Parliament itself on the timings. Can we just have a look at what's being said? So this is from Parliament itself. Look, votes expected between 2:30 and 3, which is maybe slightly earlier than you were expecting. Would that make sense to you, or do you think that actually the debate has more life in it?
I think the word I got back from somebody who'd been in the chamber, and he intimated to come from the Speaker, was he was expecting to let it run till about 5:30.
Right, okay.
Now that's not official, I don't think, but there are a lot of people who want to speak. This is a big day. he's accepted at 2:30 was not necessarily going to be a hard stop. So I would think it'll run later than that, but I might be wrong. I mean,
well, look,
it's second-hand information.
We just look at the Commons there. I think this is Rebecca Long-Bailey winding up for Labour, David.
Well.
So thank you very much for joining us.
You may be right.
It's good to see you. I'll let you go.
At least one of my forecasts is wrong. Then.
Thank you very much. Let's join this.
Single trade union in this country, not a single one backs this deal. The TUC say, and I quote, "This would be a disaster for working people." Unison have said it would risk every workplace right and leave public services exposed and vulnerable. While Unite say, by further diluting the legal protections for labour and environmental standards, the Prime Minister has made the laws that underpin workers' rights and public safety extremely vulnerable in future trade deals. Mr. Speaker, I could go on. But we should also look at the business case. Please forgive me for not giving way. We're extremely pushed for time. What does this deal mean for business? Put it simply, for business, for our industries and our manufacturing, it reduces access to the market of our biggest trade partner, threatening jobs up and down our country at a time when more investment is needed, not less. There is no economic impact assessment and no accompanying legal advice. Funny that, I wonder why. Because according to The Guardian, Britain is on course to sacrifice as much as 130 billion in lost GDP growth over the next 15 years if the Brexit deal goes ahead. And industry's been clear on this. It needs that market access. It needs a customs union to keep vital supply chains flowing. Yet this deal sells them out. No barrier-free access, no customs union. Instead, it puts the fantasy of chasing damaging trade deals with Donald Trump over the needs of our country. Again, Mr. Speaker, you don't have to take my word for it. Make UK, who represent British manufacturing, are clear. Commitments to the closest possible trading relationship in goods have gone. And that, Mr. Speaker, this deal will add cost and bureaucracy, and our companies will face a lack of clarity inhibiting investment and planning. Even the CBI have added the deal remains inadequate on services and that they have now serious concerns about the direction of the future UK-EU relationship. So this is a bad deal for industry, a bad deal for manufacturing and, more importantly, a bad deal for jobs. But, Mr. Speaker, let's look at what this deal will mean for the environment. Let's see what Green groups are saying about it. Greener UK, for instance. They've raised huge...
Order. There is an excessive noise in the chamber. It's very unfair on the honourable lady who's developing her contribution. Let's listen to each other courteously. Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Greener UK, for instance, they've raised huge concerns, saying environmental safeguards are absent from the new withdrawal agreement and that the toothless environment bill put forward by the government, and I quote, provides neither an enforcement body with independence nor a commitment to non-regression in domestic law. All at a time when we are facing a climate crisis across the world. This is simply not acceptable. And, Mr. Speaker, this government is asking us to simply trust them on all these issues, quite tellingly without setting out any detail or legislation today. The Prime Minister says nobody in his government wants to reduce rights or standards in this country. Well, that is a remarkable statement, especially when you look at their track record. How can we trust them? Well, members on the opposite benches can cheer all they like, but how can we trust a Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy when she has made clear that for small businesses she envisages there being, and I quote, no regulation whatsoever, no minimum wage, no maternity or paternity rights, no unfair dismissal rights, no pension rights? How can we trust the Foreign Secretary, who wrote a pamphlet called Escaping the Straitjacket, which outlined his plans to cut workers' rights and regulations? And how can we trust the Prime Minister himself, who has said the UK should scrap the social chapter and has claimed the current weight of employment regulation is backbreaking? Mr. Speaker, the answer is we can't trust them. If their intentions were to maintain current standards, then why have they slashed every level playing field commitment in the withdrawal agreement? So, Mr. Speaker, we are about to make history, and in the final moments before we enter those lobbies, MPs will consider the weight placed upon their shoulders. Is this deal right for their communities, industries and future generations? No, it isn't. Agreeing this deal doesn't get Brexit done. Instead, it would sell out our country and sell out our communities, leaving us open to an onslaught of deregulation, reduction of rights, putting jobs at risk. And it's something no Labour MP nor any other MP worried about protecting their community could ever support.
Mr. Michael Gove.
Michael Gove, the Cabinet Minister, summing up for the government.
Mr. Speaker, our democracy is a precious thing and this Parliament is a special place. Our democracy depends on respect for difference, and this Parliament thrives on respecting the sincerity and the commitment to public service of every member. And that is why I know that deciding how to vote today for many members will have been difficult. And it is important that all of us recognise that for those who argued to remain and still argue that that is the best outcome, they do so as patriots, but they take a different view from some of us. And for those who argued to leave and have consistently argued that we should leave and have argued for a better deal, we should all recognise that they are arguing for what they believe is best for our country. I respect those who have argued for both positions, but I respect most of all the many people in this House who argued that we should remain, who during the course of that campaign believed that it was the best course for the country, but who now recognise that the people having spoken, that verdict must be respected. And that is why, not yet, and that is why, in a debate characterised by many brilliant and passionate speeches, the speech that stood out for me was the speech by my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead. She argued for Remain. But she also recognised that when the people had spoken, their verdict had to be respected. And it is not just on our benches, it is on every bench. Members like the member for Great Grimsby, or the member for Don Valley, or for Rother Valley, they all argued that we should remain. But now they recognise that there is something more precious than being a leaver or a remainer. That is being a Democrat. What unites us in this House is that we are Democrats. And we voted in this House of Commons to have a referendum. We voted in this House of Commons to say that we would respect the verdict of the people. We voted overwhelmingly for Article 50, which honoured that referendum and said that we would leave. How will it look to those who sent us here now if we say to them, we made those sacred promises, but now we choose to dishonour them? Now, it is the case, I know that there will be individuals who will have specific qualms and concerns about this deal, and they exist all across this House. But it is also the case that the time has come for us to decide. None of us in a country that voted 52-48, none of us in a House of 650 members, none of us in a country of 65 million people can ensure that we have our own perfect Brexit. No. But what we can do is we can be prepared to put aside our perfect for the sake of the common good. And that is what the public want us to do now. In his speech, the member... No, I won't. In his speech, the member for Holborn and St Pancras laid out some of the concerns that he has about the political declaration. But he knows and we know that if we vote today for the deal, if we vote for this withdrawal agreement, we can then move on to ensure that the future economic partnership that we all want can be framed in the best interests of the British people. And we have given... I shan't give way to the honourable gentleman, but I'm grateful for his persistence. We can ensure...
Order! The Chancellor of the Duchy is not currently giving way. Mr. Michael Gove.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And during that discussion about our future economic partnership, every party in this House, every voice in this House will have equal weight and equal value in making sure that we can deliver a Brexit deal that delivers for the 52 and for the 48. That is our intention. And let me be clear, we on this side of the House, no I shan't, and no, I won't. However tempting it might be, I will decline on this occasion. Now, the truth is, because no deal can ever satisfy anyone, we could spend all our time searching for that elusive perfect deal. But what would that position look like to the country? What would it look like to all those who have sent us here? What would it look like to the honourable lady's constituents who voted to leave and expected that vote to be honoured? They voted to put trust in this place, to put trust in Parliament, to make a vital decision. If we duck that decision, if we dither, if we delay, then I'm afraid that people will feel a sense of depression and dismay and demoralisation that the Parliament that they hoped would keep its promises has chosen once again to duck its responsibilities. Now, I am clear also that everyone who has spoken in this debate has spoken from the best of motives, including my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, a dear and old friend of mine. But one of the things that I would say to him and to others, and on that point I have to give up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the chance for giving way. Everybody has their beliefs, and everybody does what they believe is right, including our honourable friend, the member for West Dorset. If the bill that follows the meaningful vote were to fail, how would the government avoid no deal before the end of October?
One of the things that this government is absolutely committed to doing is making sure that we have a deal. And one of the things that we're also committed to doing is making sure that we obey the law. And one of the things that we're also committed to doing is making sure that we respect the voices of all of those in this House. Let me stay firmly from this dispatch box. This government is committed to ensuring that we have a deal. And the best way of getting that deal, leaving on October the 31st and being able to move on to the other issues which the people in this country want us to discuss, is by accepting the honourable motives of the mover of the amendment, but recognising also that if we accept that amendment, we will not have a meaningful vote today. We will not unlock the door to a deal being passed. We will have voted, I'm afraid, in the terms of that motion for more delay. And I'm afraid on that basis, I would urge everyone who wants us to honour the referendum mandate to recognise that that amendment, however sincerely it's been put, is unnecessary. What is necessary now is for us to reach a moment of decision. In the other place, Lord Judge, the leader of the crossbench peers, in some respects, the voice of moderation in that House, explicitly said that the time is past for people to quibble and question the precise terms of this deal. He said, a former Lord Chief Justice, that Parliament needs to get on with it. Otherwise, there will be profound damage to public confidence in this place. And that is the question that every member of the House must ask. How will our constituents feel if tonight we vote to support this deal without the amendment? Our constituents will feel that a cloud has been lifted, that Parliament has listened to them with respect, that the vote in 2016 that we promised to honour has, after 3.5 years of deadlock and division, been honoured by a House that at last is ready to unite. And that is the choice that faces us all. Because if we don't vote for this deal unamended, then I'm afraid that all of those who send us here watching our deliberations will say that Parliament has failed to meet the moment. Parliament has failed to rise to the occasion. Parliament has failed to ensure that an important democratic vote, the most important vote with the greatest number of votes cast for any proposition in our history, will be delayed, will be dishonoured, and will not be delivered. And that is why I urge everyone in this House to recognise our first duty is to the principle that underpins this place.
Said no. The right honourable gentleman is responding to the debate, and he will do so to a conclusion. Mr. Michael Gove.
Our first duty to our constituents and to our country is to keep our promises. This House said that we would honour that referendum mandate. The time has come. And the question that all of us must answer when we return to our constituencies is, did you vote to break the deadlock? Did you vote to end the division of these days? Did you vote to bring the country together? I know that members across this House will support the government this afternoon to do just that.
Michael Gove for the government. Let's see what the Speaker has to say.
To move that the questions...
Well, I am indeed putting the question. I'm extremely grateful. The question is that Amendment A be made. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby.
So Mr. Speaker calls this first division, which is on this amendment presented by the senior Conservative MP and former Cabinet Minister and close colleague of David Cameron's at one stage, Sir Oliver Letwin. He is the one who has put this amendment forward. And what I'd like to do now, as MPs are filing into the division lobbies, is just explain to you once again what this is about, because we're not at the stage yet where MPs are voting on Boris Johnson's deal. We're not at that stage. We are voting on an amendment which will have a big impact on what happens in the next half hour or so in the House of Commons. So, the Letwin amendment basically withholds approval of Boris Johnson's deal with the EU until a certain point, until the legislation to enact the deal has been safely passed. In other words, it delays it. It automatically triggers the so-called Benn Act, the act associated with the Labour MP Hilary Benn. This tells the Prime Minister that he must seek a further delay to the Brexit process beyond the deadline, the current deadline of October the 31st. And that is because, according to the law, an extension must be requested if a deal has not been approved by MPs by the end of today. Today is the deadline for this approval. So once the legislation is passed, if it is, the delay would fall away. So, very, very important vote coming up on this Letwin amendment. If it is passed, it builds in another delay, and we heard Michael Gove saying there that if it is passed, well, then the government is not minded to hold that big vote on the deal itself. This vote is really a crunch vote on the process that we are seeing today on this historic day in Westminster, the first Saturday sitting for 37 years. If the Letwin amendment is defeated in this vote coming up, well, then we will move on to vote on Boris Johnson's deal struck in Brussels earlier this week. So the vote coming up, you know, puts us at a fork in the road, if you like. It's a very, very important fork in the road indeed. Let's join Vicky Young in the central lobby inside Parliament there, just a short distance away from where MPs are voting. And Vicky, what are you picking up now?
Yeah, you can see MPs scurrying through. Most of them were in the chamber for that rather rowdy end to proceedings. And as you say, this is the amendment. This is not the vote on the deal itself. This is Oliver Letwin saying, look, the House has considered this, but we are withholding our approval until legislation goes through. Now, I have to say, there is a lot of anger here, particularly amongst pro-Brexit Conservative MPs. They feel that this is a group of MPs who went to court in order to make sure that there was a so-called meaningful vote in this place, that MPs would get the chance to vote on a deal. They now feel that this is really moving the goalposts. It's taking that opportunity away, because Downing Street say what this does, if this goes through from Oliver Letwin, it actually means that the vote, the next vote that we might come to, would be totally meaningless, because it is not in any way saying that the House of Commons supports the deal. So there is a lot of anger here. Lots of people been trying to persuade Oliver Letwin. He was in Downing Street last night trying to persuade him to not go ahead with this. What I think Downing Street hoped was that he would table it slightly differently, maybe say in this amendment something like, look, we approve this deal or we support this deal, but we're not going to give it formal approval until the legislation goes through. And really it's partly because there's a lack of trust. There are some who think what might have happened today is that MPs could have voted for the deal, the bill, the legislation that you have to have before we leave, that could have been voted down. Then we're potentially left in a position of leaving without a deal once again at the end of October. So a lot of unhappiness here, and Downing Street saying we are not going to take part in something which is an irrelevance, so they wouldn't take part in any vote if it came to it, if this Oliver Letwin amendment goes through.
Just bear with me, Vicky. I'll be back to you in just a second because I just want to explain to people what's going on. And there you have an image, look, from Layla Moran, one of the MPs voting there, of what the division lobby looks like, because there are no TV cameras in there, as we know. And I'm not sure that people are meant to take photos anyway, but we're very grateful to Layla for tweeting this one, because it gives you a sense of the absolute intensity of the atmosphere as MPs are queuing up there to pass the tellers' desks. So if I can explain to you, if you look at this picture, they're all queuing up, and then they will pass a desk at the end of the lobby where the tellers, that's the MPs who are counting the votes, will tick off names as they go past. They have a long list of 650 MPs, and they'll tick the names off as the MPs pass the desk, and then of course they'll count them all up, and then because it's a full house today, it'll take maybe 12-15 minutes for the vote to come through. So just an image there from inside the lobby in the House of Commons. There are two voting lobbies, one on each side of the House, one behind the government benches, one behind the opposition benches, and depending on whether you're voting yes or no, the aye or no, you will go into either lobby. So that's what's happening now, and then we'll see, if we look in the Commons, have a look at the Commons chamber itself, you will see MPs having voted coming back into the chamber. Okay, so they've filed out, they've gone round the back and round the sides of the chamber, if you like, and then they come back in again. So once they're all in place, we'll wait for the tellers to come and stand right there at the dispatch box where you can see the mace on display. The mace has to be there when the House is in session. The tellers will group 4 of them, 2 on each side, and we will then get the result of this first amendment that we are looking at from Sir Oliver Letwin. So as the voting goes on, let's join Vicky once again.
Yeah, and an update there from our colleague Laura Koonsberg, political editor of the BBC. There's been a lot of speculation about what the DUP might do in this vote. The government has been desperately trying to persuade them. I spoke to one minister just now, at least to abstain on this, to give them a chance of getting to the main vote with it not being changed. That has failed by the sounds of it. A DUP source telling Laura Koonsberg that they are going to back the Oliver Letwin amendment. Now that makes it very, very difficult for the government to get the numbers to defeat the Oliver Letwin amendment. Now, the DUP, as you know, incredibly unhappy about the deal that Boris Johnson has done with the EU. They have been very outspoken against it, and I don't think they were really in the mood to do Boris Johnson any favours with this. We know that Nigel Dodds, their Westminster leader, was in having meetings in the last few hours as they tried to persuade them. Who knows what kind of back and forth there was in those negotiations, but it sounds like that isn't going to happen. I think the DUP trying to do everything that they can to stop a deal going through Parliament, which they totally disapprove of. So that's very bad news for the government. As we've just previously said, if the Oliver Letwin amendment goes through, the government has indicated that they won't take part in a further vote. Now, there's various ways they can do that, but they simply won't provide the people to count the votes, so it would be quite unlikely that that would go ahead. We'll wait and see when we get the result of this. Each vote normally takes about 15 minutes.
That's interesting, Vicky, isn't it? Because when we spoke to, I think, David Davis earlier on, he was holding out the possibility of an abstention by the DUP. But as you say, they're not just unhappy, they feel very badly let down, and they're very angry. So the likelihood of the DUP actually doing the Prime Minister, as you say, any favours today was pretty much close to zero.
Yeah, it was. I mean, listening to Sammy Wilson, one of their MPs in the House of Commons earlier, just absolutely furious at what's happened. They didn't like Theresa May's deal because they felt that it effectively put a regulatory border down the Irish Sea, splitting them off in some ways from the rest of the United Kingdom. Well, this deal, they say, it's not a thin line, it's a very thick borderline, and they feel that they're being pushed closer to the EU and, of course, Ireland rather than the UK. So they feel that they've been betrayed on all of this, extremely unhappy. The government, of course, arguing, hang on a minute, in law, Northern Ireland is not leaving the UK customs union, it is staying within that territory as well, but they get the option, of course, of having 2 feet, foot in each camp, which should be beneficial to Northern Ireland businesses. That is not how the DUP sees it. They see it purely in terms of the union, and they think that the deal undermines the union.
Vicky, we'll be back to you as soon as that vote looks as if it's taking place. A quick look in the Commons again, if I may, because it's filling up again. Lots of MPs have now been voting. As we know, 650 MPs is the number in the House of Commons. But of course, the Speaker and deputies don't vote, and the Sinn Féin members are not taking part. They never attend the House of Commons. So the numbers are, adjusted because of that. But we will see very soon whether this amendment by Sir Oliver Letwin is carried or not. And if it is carried, well, then it presents Boris Johnson with a massive headache. And as we look at these images, I'm going to bring my panel in again, Dawn and Anand and Katie, just to sort of tell us really what they think will happen if this is carried. And the reason I'm saying if it's carried is because we now know the DUP are going to vote against. They're not going to abstain. They're going to make it even more difficult for Boris Johnson. So let's have a scenario question first of all. Dawn, first of all, what do you think will happen if this is carried?
I think the government will immediately panic. They've been trying to issue threats all day, basically trying to convince people not to vote for the Letwin Amendment. They were desperately trying to get the DUP right at the last minute. So I think that they will panic. There has been talk about whether or not they could ask MPs not to go in and vote. So I think the Letwin Amendment will pass, and then we will just see panic immediately from the government. I think it will be quite unclear exactly what's happening.
So Michael Gove did give us a hint on that, didn't he? He said, well, if this passes, there's no point really having a meaningful vote at all. But that was clear. What's not clear is what they do.
Well, they have to fundamentally change their strategy. What Boris Johnson wanted was a clean vote on his deal that went through, and then MPs had 2 weeks to pass the accompanying implementing legislation, or face the prospect of no deal. If that threat of no deal is lifted, Parliament has the time and leisure to go over this deal in excruciating detail. Select committees can do inquiries about it, and that makes it a far, far rockier path for the Prime Minister.
So just to underline, viewers will be watching this thinking, OK, what is the practical implication of this amendment coming up, being carried? What would you say?
Well, it means we're not leaving on the 31st of October, first and foremost, but it also means there's a bruising battle ahead for the Prime Minister, because even if he secures a majority for the deal as it is, getting the implementing legislation, which will contain all the gory details of what this means in practice, getting that through Parliament is going to be a real struggle.
Katie, is it your view that now that the DUP have made their views clear about actually opposing the government, and not just doing that, but voting for this amendment, where do you think that'll leave the Prime Minister?
Oh, I think, again, it's a difficult position he'll find himself in, but they will try and push and have a vote next week coming on the legislation. But as Anne points out, you'll start to see Labour MPs who are thinking about backing this deal will think, well, actually, I've got more time now to really look at all the potential pros and cons, which is exactly what I think Number 10 didn't want. So it's a more uphill task, and it gets, I think, less likely that we are leaving on the 31st of October, but not impossible, because ultimately the EU have to say yes to an extension.
Yes, and that's the other thing which we need to just play in. We were in Brussels just a couple of days ago, and Mr. Juncker couldn't have been clearer. He stepped up to the microphone and was asked several times, there's a deal and would you consider another extension? And he was very clear. He says, look, we have a deal. There is no argument for another extension. Now, was that being totally upfront? I mean, because, Katja Adler, our colleague, was telling us there's no way she thinks that the other EU leaders will shut the door on the possibility of an extension. Is that your take?
Well, no. Firstly, I think what he said was there is no need for a prolongation. He didn't say we're going to block it. Secondly, even if he had said we're going to block it, it's not up to him anyway. It's up to the heads of state and government. I find it hard to believe that they would reject a request for an extension, because they don't want no deal, and they certainly don't want to be seen to be responsible for no deal.
No. The blame game in this has been very, very important, hasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that as soon as the tellers come back in and we find out the Letwin Amendment has passed, Number 10 and Boris Johnson will immediately be turning round to everybody who voted for the amendment, saying you are blocking Brexit.
Yeah.
They will be trying to completely blame everybody who voted for this amendment for stopping Brexit.
Because that strategy, if I can call it the campaign strategy, the political campaign strategy, is now going to be very clear, Katie, isn't it?
Yeah, and ultimately Boris Johnson wants to push for a general election. He hasn't been allowed it yet, but I do think the fact that he has negotiated a deal he is happy to sell means that even if things don't go their way, and they don't seem to be, I think there is renewed optimism that they have a deal they can put forward in a general election, which they think puts the Conservatives in a better position.
look at the chamber, it's now very full, and as we can see, a huge crowd of MPs at what they call the bar of the House. That's the entrance point, which approaches the dispatch box there with the mace in place, and then the parliamentary clerks behind the mace, and then the Speaker's chair, of course, which is at the moment the chair of John Bercow, although he has announced that he will soon be resigning as stepping down as Speaker, at which point there will be a new Speaker appointed. But I think it's fair to say that this Speaker certainly has played a very, very important, some people would say controversial, some people would say troublemaking role in the Brexit process, depending on where you're coming from. So Mr. Speaker Bercow still presiding on this first common sitting in 37 years, very much aware of the historic significance of what is going on, very much aware that what happens today will dictate the future of this Brexit process a full 3.5 years after the referendum took place. And earlier, of course, we heard for the first time from the former Prime Minister Theresa May on the Brexit issue itself. She has spoken on other issues in the House, including domestic violence, but on the Brexit issue, she got up and made a fairly concise speech, but basically said, look, I have a sense of déjà vu here. There was a bit of laughter around that because, of course, she's presented her deal several times to the House and was, well, I think it's fair to say, rather embarrassed and humiliated by the scale of her repeated defeats. But she's putting her backing here for Boris Johnson and his deal, and she's urged other MPs to do the same, to respect the result of that 2016 referendum. That was the former Prime Minister's contribution, and Boris Johnson looked on in I thought, a rather grateful way at the kind of intervention that she'd made. But the Labour front bench, in the form of Keir Starmer earlier and Rebecca Long-Bailey, have made their opposition to this deal very clear. It is their view that it is a far worse deal and more harmful to the UK than the one presented by Theresa May earlier this year, and for that reason they will vote against the deal. But just to remind viewers who are joining us at this point, at this very important moment in parliamentary procedure and in parliamentary history, the vote coming up is not on the deal itself, okay? It is not on Boris Johnson's deal. This vote is on a very important amendment presented by the Conservative Sir Oliver Letwin. And if this amendment is carried, it will have the effect of delaying the Brexit process, and it'll mean that the Prime Minister will be obliged by law to ask for an extension to the Brexit process. It is that important, and for that reason, if it is carried, we're not going to have that big vote on the Brexit deal today. Despite all the expectation, all the talk about today being the day of the big decision, the big D-Day, that will not be the case if this amendment is carried. The tellers are still not in place. We'll see 4 of them in place standing at the dispatch box when they're ready to announce the vote. But because the House is so full, and because we have 650 or so MPs, or just under that number, here present today, it takes a good 15 minutes, sometimes longer actually, to count all the votes. And as I look at this image, as we just stay on this image if we can, I'll bring my colleague Vicky Young back in again, who's just in the central lobby outside the chamber. The expectation now is reaching sort of pretty intense levels, Vicky.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think the news that the DUP are not backing the government is very significant. I think they're going to really struggle to win this vote without the support of the DUP. They'd need to have an awful lot of Labour MPs on their side. They've certainly got some of the former Conservatives. You'll remember the ones who have been booted out of the parliamentary party, 21 of them. Certainly some of them are not happy about this Oliver Letwin amendment. One of them, Alistair Burt, a former Foreign Office Minister, said, look, it's not what he wants. He wanted a delay to Brexit to be a possibility if there was no deal on the table. If Boris Johnson had decided to go for no deal, that's why he wanted it there. But he says that's not what he thinks is what's needed now, because there is a deal on the table. Boris Johnson went out there, he got a deal, even though lots of people said he didn't want to or that he couldn't get it. That deal is now there and could be voted on today. But instead, MPs are now voting on delaying once again. So just to be clear, if Oliver Letwin's amendment goes through. And just to say, that will be the ayes when the Speaker calls out the vote. The ayes will be Oliver Letwin and those people wanting to pass his amendment. The noes will be the government. If it goes through, it means that by 11 o'clock tonight, Boris Johnson, by law, has to ask the EU for yet another delay to Brexit. Now, we've heard an awful lot from him about how he's not going to do that he will leave on October the 31st, that he will never ask for a delay. You'll remember he will rather die in a ditch. I think the tellers are coming back. I'm looking very closely. They're standing there. Here we go. The government's lost.
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 322. The noes to the left, 306.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 322. The noes to the left, 306. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock.
A very significant moment. This builds in delay. What will the government say?
That the motion, as amended, be agreed to. As many as other opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. We now come to motion number 2. I remind the House that I've selected the manuscript amendment in the name of Peter Kyle and others. Minister or whip on duty to move formally. Not moved.
Shame.
Thank you. Order. Point of order, the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to you. I'm very grateful to the House of Commons staff, everybody who's put themselves out, everybody who's come to give up their time in this debate today. It's been a very important debate, an exceptional moment for our country, an exceptional moment for our Parliament. Alas, the opportunity to have a meaningful vote has effectively been passed up because the meaningful vote has been voided of meaning. But I wish the House to know that I'm not daunted or dismayed by this particular result, and I think it probably became likely once it was obvious that the amendment from my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, was going to remain on the order paper. I continue in the very strong belief that the best thing for the UK and for the whole of Europe is for us to leave with this new deal on October the 31st. And to anticipate the questions that are coming from the benches opposite, I will not negotiate a delay with the EU. And neither does the law compel me to do so. I will tell our friends and colleagues in the EU exactly what I've told everyone in the last 88 days that I've served as Prime Minister, that further delay would be bad for this country, bad for our European Union, and bad for democracy. So next week, the government will introduce the legislation needed for us to leave the EU with our new deal on October the 31st. And I hope that our European Union colleagues and friends will not be attracted, as benches opposite are, or rather I should say the front bench is, by delay. I don't think that they will be attracted by delay. And I hope that then honourable members, faced with a choice of our new deal for the UK and the European Union, will change their minds, because it was pretty close today. I hope that they will change their minds and support this deal in overwhelming numbers. Since I became Prime Minister, I've said we must get on and get Brexit done on October the 31st so that this country can move on. Mr. Speaker, that policy remains unchanged. No delays, and I will continue to do all I can to get Brexit done on October the 31st, and I continue to commend this excellent deal, Mr. Speaker, to the House.
The Labour leader trying to get in, Jeremy Corbyn.
Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome today's vote. Parliament has clearly spoken.
Order. Order. Apologies. The Prime Minister was heard. Yes, he was. Don't argue the toss with the chair. I'm telling you what the situation is, and everybody could detect. The Prime Minister was heard, and the Leader of the Opposition will be heard. It is as simple and unarguable as that. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome today's vote. It's an emphatic decision by this House that has declined to back the Prime Minister's deal today and clearly voted to stop a no-deal crash-out from the European Union. The Prime Minister must now comply with the law. He can no longer use the threat of a no-deal crash-out to blackmail members to support his sell-out deal. Labour is not prepared to sell out the communities that we represent. We're not prepared to sell out their future. And we believe that ultimately the people must have the final say on Brexit, which actually only the Labour Party is offering. Today is an historic day for Parliament because it said it will not be blackmailed by a Prime Minister who is apparently prepared once again to defy a law passed by this Parliament. I invite him to think very carefully about the remarks he just made about refusing, apparently, to apply for the extension which the EU No. 2 Act requires him to do.
Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm most grateful. I think all of us in this House are aware of the responsibilities that we have. This is a crisis that we are in. And I'm thankful that the House has voted the way it has done on the amendment this afternoon. There is a clear expression from this House that we cannot crash out on the 31st of October. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask you what we can do to make sure that the Prime Minister respects the law of the land, that the Prime Minister respects the Benn Act and sends a letter to the European Council seeking that extension. And I wonder what we can do to make sure that the government does not bring forward a bill until that extension, as has been instructed, is delivered upon. And any failure of a Prime Minister who thinks he's above the law, well, Prime Minister, you'll find yourself in court.
I don't mean it in any spirit of discourtesy to the right honourable gentleman, but I think his contribution was rhetorical in the sense that I don't think he was particularly inviting my immediate response. If he was doing so, I would say to him that I think judicious consideration of these matters is always beneficial to colleagues across the House. Everybody, of course, must abide by the law. The right honourable gentleman is versatile, dexterous and experienced in the use of the parliamentary weaponry to try to ensure that his point of view prevails. So we'll leave it there for now. Point of order, Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's deal was a bad deal, and the public deserve to have the final say, not just the hundreds of thousands who are marching outside, but the millions of people across our country.
Order. I recognise there are very strongly held views on both sides of the House and on both sides of this debate. But the leader of the Liberal Democrats must be heard. And it is unconscionable if there is an attempt to stop someone being heard. Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the people who are outside this building right now will be heard, and they deserve the final say, along with millions across the country. So the most urgent thing right now, Mr. Speaker, is that the Prime Minister complies with the law. Yep. And I ask your guidance. Would it be possible to suspend the sitting for a short time to allow the Prime Minister to go and send his letter and come back and make a statement to the House to confirm that he has done so?
I'm grateful to the honourable lady. It is not order. It is not my intention to suspend the sitting. The point will have been heard by the Prime Minister. I say to the honourable lady, all sorts of things are possible, but as to what is judged appropriate at this time, I think the puckish grin on the contours of the Honourable Lady's face suggests that she was making a point but not expecting such a decision. I'm grateful to her. Of course I will come to the... momentarily. Of course I will come to the honourable gentleman. A point of order, Sir Oliver Letwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to say first of all to the Prime Minister that I actually agreed with what he said at the end there, and that I'm absolutely certain he will comply with the law. I want to say to friends and colleagues across the House who helped us achieve this amendment, which I believe to be profoundly in the national interest, that I'm very grateful for that cooperation, but that our ways are now going to part. Because for many of us on these benches who have cooperated in preventing a no-deal exit by putting in place or helping to put in place the Ben Act and helping to keep its insurance policy in place today, now when the Prime Minister brings the withdrawal implementation bill to the House of Commons, we will be voting for it. We will continue to vote for it. We will seek to ensure that it becomes the law before the 31st of October, and if it does so become the law, this country will leave on the 31st of October, of hope that I share with the Prime Minister, but it will do so on the basis of knowing that should anything go wrong, we will not crash out without a deal on that date.
I'm most grateful to the right honourable gentleman, and so will many members of the House for the clarity of his exposition. People take their own view of it, but it's certainly clear and very pithy, and I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman. Point of order, Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Speaker, this decision now will give further time for detailed consideration of the bill when it comes forward. It will also give an opportunity to consider in detail whatever amendments come forward. It has the effect of not approving this deal today. And of course, we will examine all the details of the bill and all amendments in the light of our overriding concern about the constitutional economic integrity of the Union. That is our priority. It will remain our priority in the days ahead, and that is the basis on which we will now proceed in a timely and sensible manner.
I'm grateful. Our proceeding, I hope the honourable gentleman will take it in the right spirit. If, having known him for over 20 years, I say that I feel that our proceedings would not be complete without a point of order from the honourable gentleman, the member for Stone, the chair of the European Scrutiny Committee. Well, somebody is suggesting a division, but I will not allow a division on that matter. Point of order, Sir William Cash.
There is much talk about the law of the land. The law of the land, as it stands at this moment in time, is quite simple. Section 1 of the Withdrawal Act 2018 categorically states that the European Communities Act is repealed on exit day, which is the 31st of October, just in case anyone can't read.
Well, he's grateful, and I'm sure the House will be indebted to the honourable gentleman for his legal exegesis.
So we had a hugely significant vote in the House of Commons, and Mr. Speaker is just managing the responses to that vote right now. But if you're just joining us here on BBC News for this special coverage, let me just update you on what has just happened in the House of Commons as MPs are filing out of the House now, having really started to digest the importance of what's gone on, because an amendment presented by the Conservative MP, Sir Oliver Letwin, has been carried, and has been carried by 322 to 306, as we can see there on the screen. So in this very finely balanced House of Commons, that's a pretty decent majority of 16, and a very big setback for Boris Johnson, because what does this mean? It means that MPs have backed an amendment which says that you can't have a vote on the final Brexit deal until all the legislation has been passed by the Commons. Now, that is a very, very big development in this process, and for those people expecting the big vote on Brexit to happen today, well, it's not going to happen, because what's going to happen now is that Boris Johnson will bring forward legislation next week in the hope that that can be passed in rapid order by the Houses of Parliament in order for Brexit to happen on the 31st of October. I think it's fair to say that that is an ambitious parliamentary task that he set, but he was adamant that that's what he was going to do. Vicky Young, our chief political correspondent in the central lobby of the Houses of Parliament, we have to underline, Vicky, how significant a moment that was.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the government just did not have the numbers to defeat that. And just to recap, it means that what they've passed is something that says this House has considered the matter, i.e. the deal, and withholds its approval until the legislation, the bill which enacts the withdrawal agreement, goes through. Now, those who voted for it say that it stops the possibility of, by somehow, the Prime Minister and the House of Commons, people in the Conservative Party maybe, trying to get a no-deal Brexit at the end of October. There are others, though, who are saying, look, they're just simply trying yet again to block Brexit completely. So the big question, what happens next? What this means is that by law, the Prime Minister has to ask the EU for another delay to Brexit. It's called the Ben Act. That kicks in at 11 o'clock tonight. But interestingly, Boris Johnson, as he said all along, suggesting there he's just not going to do it. I will not negotiate a delay, nor does the law force me to. There's been so much speculation about how he could somehow get round this law. No one really thinks he can, but there's been talk of whether he sends one letter and then another saying, look, I don't really want this. The other thing he did say, and we know will happen now, is that the legislation, that withdrawal agreement bill, will be introduced to the House of Commons early next week. It would mean potentially a big vote on Tuesday night on what's called the second reading. That's the first stage, really, of any bill that goes through this place. And that will be a big moment, because that could be, if it gets through the second reading, the first time that the House of Commons has backed any kind of withdrawal agreement to do with Brexit. So that is now being seen potentially as an alternative to the big meaningful vote that we might have had today. And there's still a possibility, although not a large one, but there is still a possibility that if that bill gets through the House of Commons and the House of Lords by the 31st of October, that we still do leave with a deal on the 31st of October. The big question, though, what will Boris Johnson do tonight about sending that letter? If he does send it, or if someone else sends it, what does the EU do in return?
Well, that's the question, Vicky, because, you know, the word from number 10 earlier was that the Prime Minister himself, as I read it anyway, would not be sending a letter. It was worded very generally, suggesting that Parliament would be requesting an extension. I mean, can you help us with that?
I don't think that that is in the bill. You've got to remember that the Ben Act is very specific. It's written in there at the end, the letter itself, and it says the Prime Minister has to send it. So it's quite difficult to get around it, even though the Prime Minister has said all along that he won't do it. Now, there's been lots of speculation. Would he get the Cabinet Secretary to do it? I think that's really unlikely, you know, dragging in the civil service to all of this. That's not likely to happen. Would he send one letter followed by another saying, actually, I don't really mean it? What other options are there? Get the Speaker to send it? I mean, that doesn't seem plausible either. It's not about Parliament asking for a delay. It has to be the Prime Minister. It has to be the government. So we're going to have to wait and see what they decide to do. They were really tight-lipped about this earlier. Even though people were, you know, predicting that Oliver Letwin's amendment might get through, they simply wouldn't say. They just keep repeating, as Boris Johnson has done, saying, I will not negotiate a delay. Now, is there any wriggle room in the word negotiate? You know, we'll have to see. But the Ben Act, the first point is he has to write a letter asking for a delay until the 31st of January.
Vicky, we'll talk again in a while. Thank you very much. Vicky Young there with the latest thoughts in the Houses of Parliament. Let's rejoin my panel once again, who've been just looking very, very closely at what's been going on and considering the implications. Dawn and Anand and Katie. Right, let's take stock. Okay, so the amendment's been carried. The Prime Minister was, I think it's fair to say, unrepentant, if that's the word, in terms of saying that he didn't consider this to be much of a setback. Let's be very clear what the Ben Act asks him now to do. Is he really in the position where he can avoid sending that letter asking for an extension?
Absolutely not. It's very, very clear in the Ben Act, it's written right into it, that the Prime Minister himself has to write and send that letter by 11 p.m. asking for an extension so that they can scrutinise the bill. So there's no way.
So that's clear. Is it remotely possible that there's a way around that for him?
Not that I can think of, and not that I've seen any lawyers come up with. And of course, the Prime Minister himself, in a written submission to a Scottish court, confirmed that he would be sending that letter.
Yeah, because but the tone of the contribution,
absolutely.
And indeed, if we're to believe it, the kind of words coming out from unnamed sources at number 10, you know, was not in that kind of area. Seemed to suggest that he would not be requesting an extension. Is that just bluster?
I would have to assume so, given the fact I can't think of an alternative that wouldn't be in breach of a very, very clear law.
Because we know, Katie, that it's the last thing he wants to do. But ultimately, by 11 o'clock tonight, he may just have to sign.
It was interesting that Boris Johnson said he would not negotiate an extension.
Yes.
Now, I think sending a letter might be a little bit different than negotiation. I think what you might see Number 10 doing is, yes, there is a legal pressure on Boris Johnson to send a letter, but I think they will try and frustrate it. And there's some talk in Number 10 of the principle of frustration. So how much can you get away with sending one letter, perhaps sending a second saying something else?
Yes.
Or other thing people around Boris Johnson say is, ultimately, this government still is in charge of its own policy. They can still choose their own positions, and their Brexit position, in their view, has not changed in regards to not getting an extension. So I think you might just start to see lots of very confusing messages. The government doing one thing because they have to, but saying something completely different.
So just
not very simple.
No. Just to go through this again. This is from a source at Number 10. So it's an unnamed source at Number 10, but from our parliamentary colleagues in the BBC. Parliament has voted to delay Brexit yet again, says this Number 10 source. The PM will not ask for an extension. Well, that's quite clear. He will tell the EU leaders there should be no delays, that they should reject Parliament's letter asking for a delay, and we should get Brexit done on October 31st with our new deal so the country can move on. Now, I'd respectfully say that that contribution from whoever the source is factually not, up to the. It's not factually right, is it, Anand?
No, I don't think so. But equally, we've seen this before, haven't we? That unnamed sources from Number 10 brief out a very aggressive message. The Prime Minister in public sounds slightly different. And that way, he can get credit from the Brexiters for talking tough, but he can equally claim it's not him when he wants to appeal to more moderate people.
Let's talk about next week, because this is also now hugely important. So the Prime Minister wants to bring forward legislation because he still wants to leave on the 31st of October. Now, that's a lot of stuff to get through. Okay, so just a thought on what next week could bring.
I think next week Labour will continue trying to stop any of their MPs voting for Boris's deal, and I think with this much space, I think actually some rebels will actually row back and will publicly say that they aren't going to vote for it. They want more time.
What do you think is going to happen next week?
Well, I think the crucial thing next week, first and foremost, is when the EU reply to us and what they say. If we assume that they say yes and they say the 31st of January, then debates will start in Parliament over this withdrawal agreement bill, which is a massive piece of legislation that puts the agreement into domestic law. It'll be big, it'll be complicated, potentially messy, because it'll fill out the details that the document agreed with the European Union is pretty ambiguous about. Then I suspect the select committees will start saying, we need to have an inquiry into this, that or the other. I think Parliament will try and drag this out, so it is vanishingly unlikely.
It's essential just to clarify this, Anand, because lots of viewers will be wondering, they've just heard the Prime Minister saying one thing, and then you're explaining to us the complexity of this legislation. His view, or at least his assertion at the dispatch box, was that this could be completed as a parliamentary process and legislative process by the end of October. You're saying that is pie in the sky.
Well, it is theoretically possible, absolutely. If Parliament just waved this through, it could be done in a few days. What I'm saying is, absent the threat of no deal, if we get this extension, Parliament won't feel the same pressure to do that, and I find it hard to see that Parliament would do that.
So we're going to let you go because you've been very, very patient. A final thought from you, Katie, on where we now stand looking at next week. What would you say to viewers about what they can expect in terms of the process next week here?
Well, I think we will get a meaningful vote in terms of a vote on Boris Johnson's Brexit deal that we thought we might get today. I think it's become more uphill for Boris Johnson to have a majority for his deal, and particularly a majority that's happy to move quickly. And the other thing we need to look out for is what's happening with this extension. If an extension is granted, the EU gives the UK one, at that point, do opposition parties bring down the Prime Minister in a confidence vote and go for a general election? Because that's what the SNP and Labour have been suggesting they want. So it may be that Boris Johnson doesn't even get the chance to try and push his Brexit deal through.
And we thought today was exciting, yeah? It's been great to have the three of you with us. Thank you very much, and lots of analysis and expertise helping viewers along the way. So thank you all three for joining us today. What I'd like to do now is, because you were mentioning the importance of the DUP of Northern Ireland in this process, their decision not to abstain in this vote today, but to actually vote for it, really was the thing that pushed this out of Boris Johnson's hands, out of his control, and delivered such a blow to him. So let's join Vicky again in the lobby, I think with Sammy Wilson of the DUP.
Yeah, that's right. We know the DUP have been very unhappy about the deal that Boris Johnson has done with the EU. There was some speculation about whether they could be persuaded maybe to abstain on that Oliver Letwin amendment. It wasn't to be. Let's discuss this with Sammy Wilson, who is with me. Why do you decide to go down the route of, some people would say, effectively stopping Parliament having a meaningful vote on a deal?
Well, I mean, first of all, this was the only way in which we could ensure that there was an opportunity to have proper scrutiny of the deal, to give the government a chance as well to reflect on what stopped the deal going through today, because there's one simple way in which this could be changed, and that is to ensure that there's a mechanism by which Northern Ireland can get out of any special arrangements for Northern Ireland using the voting mechanism in the Belfast Agreement.
Make it sound like you were doing them a favour, giving them a bit more time to have a look.
We were, and we were also doing the people of Northern Ireland a favour as well by ensuring that their interests are properly represented, and we now have an opportunity during the scrutiny of the bill to seek from the government amendments and changes which will address some of the concerns, the rightful concerns, which people in Northern Ireland have about a bill which, quite frankly, separates us off from the rest of the United Kingdom, the country which we belong to, and will damage our economy by putting a border between Northern Ireland and GB, where most of our goods are sold.
Are you concerned about the fact that now, according to law, the Prime Minister has to ask for another delay to Brexit?
Well, you know, I don't know whether he has or not. I mean, if he starts with proceeding with the bill through the House of Commons, that may be sufficient to avoid having to write the letter, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm sure he will have advice on that. But, you know, the one thing that we were not prepared to do is simply to avoid an extension to have Northern Ireland remain part of the European Union while the rest of the United Kingdom left. We have, all throughout this process, we have been strongly in favour of honouring the result of the referendum which was voted on by the people of the United Kingdom. But, you know, it would be ironic that, having been some of the strongest Brexiteers in this House, we then found that the country which we belong to was actually left in the European Union. We weren't going to allow that to happen.
What about those who say that actually in law, Northern Ireland stays in the UK Customs Union?
Well, we stay in the UK Customs territory, that's quite right, on paper. In practice, we're part of the European Union customs arrangements. And don't forget, and you know, the Prime Minister, although he says we no border between Northern Ireland and GB, has to accept that the advice which was given by his own officials was that, first of all, every good which is moved from GB to Northern Ireland will be subject to customs declarations. That movement will be subject to customs checks where necessary. That until manufacturing firms in Northern Ireland could prove that their output wasn't going into the European Union, they would have to pay tariffs on any materials which they brought in. Now, if that's not being part of the EU customs union, I don't know what is. And of course the other thing is, and it was very clear, that we could only take part in UK trade deals provided those deals did not conflict with the protocols of the European Union, of which there were, I think, 58 pages.
So just for 1 second to look ahead to Tuesday, we think that would be a second reading of the withdrawal agreement bill. Now, for those who don't follow this closely, that's normally a general debate about the bill itself. It would need to proceed beyond that in order to get to some of the changes you want. What would you do on Tuesday in a vote? Well,
we'll be voting against the second reading. Because, of course, if it failed the second reading, then the bill and the deal would have fallen again. Anyhow, though I suspect, given the speeches that were made in the House today, that it will get through the second reading, because some Labour Party members will help it through that process. And that's then when we hope to be able to put some concessions or some leverage on the government to make changes to the bill, which will not address all of our concerns, but which hopefully will address some of them.
Just very quickly, are you still talking to the government about possible?
We will be talking. I mean, we want to work with the government, because don't forget, we actually want to deliver Brexit. I mean, we have been the ones who have kind of defied all of the chicanery which has gone in this House and opposed it. But, you know, we're not going to deliver Brexit for part of the United Kingdom and not for the part that we live in, and in doing so, constitutionally damage Northern Ireland and put a situation where Northern Ireland drifts more and more towards unity with the Republic.
Sammy Wilson, thank you very much indeed. So you can hear they're really not at all persuaded by the merits of the deal, still looking for some concessions from the government. And if this bill comes forward, that could happen.
Vicky, many thanks once again, and thanks to Sammy Wilson too for joining us. Vicky Young there, our chief political correspondent in the central lobby of the Houses of Parliament here. A real sense that something hugely significant has happened in Westminster this afternoon. That the House of Commons has decided, by a majority of 16 votes, that it wants to get through all of this Brexit legislation before it is prepared to approve the Brexit deal itself. That is a huge setback for Boris Johnson, although when he spoke after the vote in the House of Commons, you know, you wouldn't have thought that he'd suffered a setback at all, because he said, actually, I'm still aiming for Brexit on the 31st of October. But as Anand Menon was telling us earlier, to get this massive legislation through Parliament by the end of October is, to put it mildly, unlikely. So it presents the government with a huge headache. Let's think about what they're making in Brussels of this, because Katya Adler's there. And Katya, if the Prime Minister, as we expect, signs a letter asking for an extension now to this process, as he is required to do by law, what will the response be there?
Well, first of all, the EU is not going to rush to take any action whatsoever, Hugh. As far as it's concerned, it has negotiated a new Brexit deal as requested by the UK government, and now it's up for that government to sell that deal in its opinion. I think this can be summed up in a tweet just now, literally, by the Polish Prime Minister, who says, we take note of the vote in the House of Commons today, but we take it not as a rejection of this new Brexit deal, but a postponement of the approval of the new Brexit deal. There is zero appetite, Hugh, in the EU to renegotiate the deal itself, and if the EU receives a request for a new Brexit extension, don't expect a rush on the EU side to grant it. Absolutely not. As far as the EU is concerned, the legal deadline before the UK leaves the EU is the 31st of October. In order to approve or to discuss a new Brexit extension, all EU leaders would have to come back here to Brussels. They just left less than 24 hours ago. They could potentially hold an extraordinary summit to discuss that extension on the 31st of October itself, because the deadline runs out at 11 p.m. UK time. First and foremost, the European Commission has said it will now wait to hear from Boris Johnson what steps he plans to do next, and what has changed since he stood here in Brussels a day or so ago saying he was absolutely sure that his new Brexit deal would pass today in the House of Commons.
Katya, bear with me for a second. I think just in line with what you were saying there, on social media, a statement from the Commission, and this is it. The Commission takes note of the vote in the House of Commons today on the so-called Letwin Amendment, meaning that the withdrawal agreement itself was not put to the vote, as we've been reporting for the past hour or so. And then he goes on to say this: it will be for the UK government to inform us about the next steps as soon as possible. And Katya, that underlines what you were just telling us there.
Well, exactly. That's what the Commissioner said. They now wait to hear from Boris Johnson. They wait to hear from Boris Johnson. All 27 EU national leaders now wait to hear from Boris Johnson, because he absolutely promised them here at the summit, as I say, just over 24 hours ago or so, that he was sure that the new Brexit deal would be voted on in Parliament today and would be approved by the majorities of MPs in Parliament today. So the EU, even if there is a request for a new Brexit extension, is not going to hurry to answer that request. As I say, they've got time until the 31st of October to do so, and they hope that in hesitating, they will maintain pressure on MPs to really look at the second Brexit deal that the EU has negotiated with the UK Prime Minister and think long and hard about what they want to do with it. They're saying at the moment they don't want to grant a new extension. Well, they don't, because they're fed up with the Brexit process, to be quite honest, Hugh. However, if push comes to shove, I cannot see EU leaders saying no to a request for another Brexit extension if the alternative, come 11 p.m. On the 31st of October, would be that no-deal Brexit that EU leaders have wanted so much to avoid. So if they see in the UK that by having an extension it could mean a general election, or it could mean a second referendum, that it could mean a referendum on this Brexit deal, I really cannot see EU leaders saying, no, you can't have that extension. But that is to unfold now in the days to come.
Katja, good to talk to you again. Thank you very much for the latest thoughts there in Brussels. Katja Adler there, our Europe editor. In a few moments, I will introduce my new panel. We have an exciting cross-section of people again. Thanks for joining us. I'll introduce you properly in just a few minutes' time to get analysis on what's been going on and a different perspective to the panel we had earlier, and just to shed some light on what the next steps might be. Before I introduce them, let's join Vicky once again with some guests in Central Lobby.
Yeah, that's right. Now, people here talking about the fact that it seems that the leader of the Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg, may have announced what they're calling a meaningful vote next week. Now, we think that is the second reading of the withdrawal agreement bill. So effectively, the government's going ahead as if their deal has been approved, and they're going to introduce the legislation which also needs to be approved before the UK can leave the EU. Let's discuss this with Conservative Peter Bone and Liberal Democrat Chuka Umunna. Peter Bone, first of all, what do you make of what's gone on today?
I'm fed up. It's been a complete waste of time. Nothing's happened, and it's spoilt my birthday, because it's my birthday and I've had to be here talking to you rather than eating cake.
That doesn't sound good for anyone, does it, Chuka? What have you done? What have you done? You've ruined his birthday.
Thank you.
Well, look, it was a bad deal that's being put in front of us, or withdrawal agreement, if I call it that. It's going to be bad for our economy. All of the Northern Irish politicians in the Commons today have said it impinges on the Good Friday Agreement, and so Parliament wanted to scrutinise it more, which is what the Letwin Amendment has allowed us to do. The big question is whether the Prime Minister is going to comply with the law and send the letter that he's now required to send under the Benn Act. I think he will do that, because if he doesn't do it by, I think it's 11 p.m. today, he'll be in contempt of court, because the government has given undertakings to a Scottish court that they will send that letter. And so he can still send that letter at the same time as pursuing his bill. Now, the question is when we will get a response from the European Union to that, confirming that an extension has been granted, so we don't drop out of the European Union without a deal in the near term.
Do you think that the Prime Minister should send the letter to Brussels?
I'm sure I do whatever the law says. I think the leader of the House of Commons is making a statement at the moment about future business. But where I disagree with Chuka, it doesn't allow for any more scrutiny. We were always going to scrutinise the bill. Why we came here today was because the Ben Burt bill required something to happen by the 19th of October. So it doesn't about anything about scrutiny. It's the fact that we were going to have a vote today to see if there was a deal, and then that would decide whether that letter is sent. We were not allowed to have that vote because of Oliver Letwin's motion. So it has been a complete and utter farce. And up and down the country, people have been saying, what on earth is Parliament doing?
Some people say you people went to court in order to make sure there was a meaningful vote in this place. That was the opportunity today. And when the Benn Act went through, people put it through in case there was a no-deal scenario looming. There's not a no-deal scenario looming because Boris Johnson got a deal.
He got a deal with the European Union, but he needs to get it through the democratically elected Parliament of the United Kingdom. That's the issue.
They haven't been able to have a clean vote, as it's called, on that today.
But that will potentially, well, it looks like it's going to happen next week. But the point about it is you won't have the sort of Damocles hanging over Parliament saying, well, if you don't agree to this deal, then we're going to, by default, fall out of the European Union without a deal.
Boris Johnson doesn't have a majority in this place. I mean, you have shown as opposition MPs that you can seize control of the agenda any time. You could have stopped no deal, couldn't you?
Well, we wanted to make sure that we had enough time before the 31st of October to be able to do that, which is why a deadline of today was set, 10 days before the scheduled date of departure, to say, well, look, if we're not en route to being able to leave with a deal that both the European Union and the UK Parliament accepts, then we should request an extension so we've got more time to do that. But look, I make no bones about this. I mean, Peter is hardcore, wants us to leave the European Union. I'm hardcore, I don't want us to leave the European Union. I want to stop Brexit because I think it's fundamentally bad for our country.
You would do anything, it's not about a delay, you want to stop it completely.
Yeah, which is, I think it's important to make that point. And of course, there are hundreds of thousands of people outside Parliament right now in Parliament Square who also also don't want to leave the European Union and think actually this shouldn't be something that just 650 MPs determine. 65 million people's voices need to be brought to the table and have a people's vote to determine.
People's vote?
We had that. It was called the referendum in 2016. Over 17 million people voted to leave. 3.5 years later, we still haven't left. Parliament has let the people down, and again, they've let them down again today.
Okay, Peter Bone, Chuka Umuna, thank you very much indeed. Two very different views on Brexit. We've heard a lot of them over the last few years.
Indeed, Vicky, and that's an understatement. Thank you very much, and thanks to your guests as well. You're just joining us here on this BBC News special from Westminster. Let me just update you on what's happened in the past hour or so. House of Commons has voted in favour of an amendment which, in effect, builds in another delay to the Brexit process, at least in theory. The Prime Minister could still get his way by the end of October, but all our experts are suggesting that is unlikely. The Letwin Amendment, as we're calling it, because it was presented by Sir Oliver Letwin, was passed by 322 to 306. That is a majority of 16, and that is a heavy blow indeed to Boris Johnson and the government. But his response in Parliament was pretty forceful, and he said he wasn't going to be considering this to be too much of a setback. And indeed, now his colleague, the leader of the House of Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg, has been talking about what's likely to happen next week. So this is what the official parliamentary channel on social media is saying. The Queen's Speech debate will continue on Monday, but there will be a vote on the deal. So a possible so-called meaningful vote on this Brexit deal on Monday. And this is despite the fact, of course, that MPs have decided that they want to pass all the legislation involved with this Brexit deal before they give their final approval to the actual deal. So we can see that this is still a highly unstable, fragile and turbulent process. So let's get a view of my new panel now, because my new panel is with me, and I'm very pleased to introduce Kevin Maguire, Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror, Laura Hughes, who's political correspondent for the Financial Times, and Hannah White from the Institute of Government. Thank you all for waiting so patiently, but I'm now fascinated to know what you make of what's happened today, and in the light of what we've just heard from Jacob Rees-Mogg, what the next week brings us. Your take first.
So clearly the Queen's Speech is still underway. Jacob Rees-Mogg has said he'd like to have another meaningful vote on Monday, but I think there's a big question about whether the Speaker will allow the government to do that. The House has just been asked to have a meaningful vote. We've all learnt very clearly this parliamentary rule that you can't ask the House the same question twice in one session. The Speaker's gone off to take advice on whether he's going to allow that or not.
That's interesting, Kevin. What I want you to do is to, for those viewers joining us, underline the significance of what's happened today.
Oh, it's a Saturday shambles and another humiliation for Boris Johnson. He's lost another battle. It doesn't mean yet he's won the war, but effectively no deal is off the table. It can't happen by accident, and he is required in law to send a letter to the other European countries asking for an extension. Now, he said immediately afterwards he wouldn't negotiate an extension, but that doesn't mean he won't send the letter. What it means is you send the letter, then you don't ask it. It's rather like your family saying you've got to organise a party for Auntie Vi. You ring Auntie Vi and say I'm going to organise a party, and then you never quite get round to it. But it's going to be very difficult now, I think, because of the constraints on party time in Parliament, the fact he has no majority in the House of Commons or the House of Lords, to get his Brexit plan, if it isn't rejected, to get it through by the end of October.
What's your take on the likelihood of getting the necessary legislation through both houses of Parliament by the end of the month?
I don't think it's impossible.
Right.
I really don't. And if you were the government today, you would be going out and you'd be arguing that it's still within the Prime Minister's gift to get this through. Because crucially, Oliver Letwin himself and other Conservatives, independent Conservatives who had the whip removed, have said they've now given themselves the insurance policy of taking no deal off the table. That doesn't mean they don't support the Prime Minister's deal. And from now on, when Boris Johnson starts tabling actual legislation in the House of Commons, they will support it. So if you were going to be optimistic, you could argue that actually this still isn't impossible. It just makes the bar a lot harder and higher for Boris Johnson.
But in the Commons, his majority is something like minus 40, 40 something now. He lost it with the Radnorshire by-election. Then he had defections to the Liberal Democrats. He's got 19 MPs he took away from the whip. I think he'll be regretting that. But crucially, he's lost those 10 DUP votes from Northern Ireland. They're the tail I'd got to enjoy wagging the Conservative government dog. But he's turned on them with a border down the Irish Sea. Nigel Dodds and Sammy Wilson made blistering speeches attacking their former ally in the House of Commons. How he gets them back on side, I don't know. Normally it's a check with a lot of zeros, but they see it as rather fundamental now that there will be a border between their corner of the United Kingdom and Great Britain.
Doesn't seem that they will compromise on that at all, judging by the tone and content of today's contributions. Just a thought on what Alan Menon was telling us earlier about the process, saying that, yes, it's possible to get the legislation through theoretically, but what he was saying was that, you may well get requests for committees to start scrutinising this, to have, extra layers built into the scrutiny, which means that this isn't something that can be done in a few weeks at all. And because it is by definition a highly complex piece or package of legislation anyway, why are they even suggesting that it's realistic in that timescale? Now, what would you say to viewers about the timescale and what the government might be able to achieve, given, as Kevin says, that they are very, very hampered in terms of parliamentary numbers?
I think the numbers have changed from when Theresa May was trying to get her deal through. And I think there was a point in the last couple of days when the government genuinely thought, before the Letwin Amendment came along, that they might be going to win this vote today. But we have to think that passing a piece of legislation is not just one-off meaningful vote. You don't just have to have a majority for that vote. When you pass Lisbon, when you pass Maastricht treaties, which were similar, complicated things about our relationship with the EU, there were between 80 and over 100 votes on those things. You have to sustain your majority throughout that whole process. Doing that under a really rushed timetable does look like an extremely big challenge.
So why is it even being held up as a possibility? Is that just Boris Johnson bravado, or what?
I think it's a bit of bluster on a day. That is, he will be embarrassed, he'll be stung by it. One government minister who is a true Brexiteer, he's been a Brexiteer for 30 years, said, well, actually, there is no master plan. What he's trying to do is he's looking for a way, he goes down that way, when he's knocked back, he looks for another way, and he's bullish about it, he does it with good humour. But there isn't a master plan, so you keep saying we can do it. But if you're the opposition parties over there, you'll be thinking, well, one, we're going to put down an amendment requiring Treasury economic impacts. What will be the effect on the economy of this plan? Quite a reasonable request, but it would delay it several days for starters. They will come in trying to attach, let's pass this plan, but then put it to another referendum, a fresh vote, a people's vote, however you want to call it. Came within 12 votes at one point. The people's vote. So there's lots of way he will be slowed down. When you get to the House of Lords, God, the numbers who will be queuing up to speak, where they all think they're experts on this and wanting long speeches and tabling very complex amendments which will come back and forth. It's going to eat up a lot of time.
Yeah. It's interesting to look at the list, actually, of former cabinet ministers who voted for the amendment today, and they included David Gauke. Well, I mean, I know people who say, well, hang on, this isn't that surprising given the line that they've taken, but it's interesting. Amber Rudd, who was in cabinet very recently, Philip Hammond, former Chancellor, of course, who's been pretty forthright on this in recent months, Justine Greening and Greg Clark. Now, will they just be surprises for the no surprises or surprises for the government? I mean, what is the impact of having people of that stature voting for this amendment?
I don't think it's a huge surprise because for a lot of them, their priority has been to stop a no deal. So they will do whatever it takes to ensure that that is still the case. But it is worth looking at who actually put their names to the amendment, because they're split in terms of their overall objection. For that first half, the former Tories, it was an insurance policy against a no deal. But the reason why the government is so nervous and why this is so problematic is that for others, Joe Swinson, the Welsh parties, their objective here was to delay it so that there's an opportunity to table amendments calling for a second referendum.
I just mentioned, sorry to drop in, I just mentioned David Gauke, so just take a breath, okay? I'm going to go back into the Houses of Parliament because I think Mr Gauke is with Vicky.
Yeah, he is, and we're trying to digest what's been going on in the Commons because Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is the leader of the House of Commons, has got up and said there's going to be a vote on Monday. Now, the problem is there's not much detail on all of that. I think even the Speaker was surprised by it. We don't exactly know what it's going to be. Is it going to be a straight vote on the Brexit deal, or is it possibly the sort of first stage really of the legislation, the bill, the withdrawal agreement bill that would need to go through? Let's discuss it with David Gauke, of course, the independent Conservative, I have to call you, I think, at the moment. We don't know for sure what this is about, but why might the government want to bring forward a vote on Monday?
Well, one of the things that we saw today was, if you like, two issues being entangled. One was about whether the government should seek an extension to get a letter in if something goes wrong with the legislation for the deal, that we have that in place so that we don't crash out without a deal on the 31st of October. And people like me want to make sure that we've got that insurance policy in place. But then there's also the issue of the Prime Minister's deal, and does Parliament back it or not? And for someone like me, I want to make sure the insurance policy is in place, but if there is a clean vote on the deal, then I would vote in favour of it. And we didn't get that today, so we don't have the details. I don't know what the motion will be, but I suspect that what the government wants to do is, in a way, what should have happened today, which was a clean vote on the deal without disabling the provisions of the Benn Act.
So that's the thing, isn't it, that we didn't get to that vote, but people like you and other of your colleagues, plus probably some Labour MPs, might well feel on Monday, look, we would vote for the deal now that we know that the delay has happened and we're not crashing out without a deal at the end of October.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So with the insurance policy in place, people like me can support the deal, we can get into legislation, we can scrutinise if there are particular issues, but basically wanting to wish this a fair wind and make progress on this quickly. I also think that we've probably got a better chance of getting some Labour people on board if they know that they're not voting for something that runs the risks of a crash out on the 31st of October. So I hope that, in fact, the Prime Minister can make progress. And I think from what I've seen today and talking to colleagues in all parties is that he can win the vote, whether it's on Monday or Tuesday.
Do you think it's realistic that the bill that needs to go through, the withdrawal agreement bill, could that get through by the 31st of October? I mean, it's not normal to have something as important as this going through both houses of Parliament that quickly, is it?
It's very tight, and the balance that needs to be struck is proper scrutiny, ensuring that we don't just nod something through, which is very important, but at the same time, the public don't want this to drag on forever and ever. It's important we get it right, but it can't drag on for ages. So I think it's a matter of getting that balance right. 31st of October is very tight, but let's see what the government proposes, and if there's a workable way of doing that, then I wouldn't want to stand in its way.
As a former Justice Secretary, presumably you would advise the Prime Minister to adhere to the law tonight at 11 o'clock and send a letter.
Yeah, the Prime Minister has to abide by the law, and no doubt he's getting advice on precisely what that requires. But I don't think one should necessarily make a big thing about the letter. The effect in terms of providing an insurance policy is right, but in the end, the way the government will be viewed is whether it has been able to deliver a good Brexit. And the letter is not at the heart of that question in a way. And let's remember, if it is possible to get the legislation through by the 31st of October, then although the letter will have gone in, it won't ever be operative because the whole process is done. So it's still possible for us to leave on the 31st of October. I've always thought that was ambitious, but it's still possible.
There was quite a lot of anger today from some Conservatives, not the ERG group, but other Conservatives, who just said, look, people went to court to make sure there was a meaningful vote, and today have actually stopped that happening. It's very hard to explain to the public, particularly given Boris Johnson doesn't have a majority here. I mean, opposition MPs have shown they can take over the order paper. They could have stopped No Deal, couldn't they? You didn't need to do all this today.
Well, I come back to this point of trying to disentangle the two aspects about whether there's support for the deal and whether we want to take away the protection that the Benn Act provides. Now, I don't think we should take away that protection. That protection remains there. But look, there are people who voted for the Letwin amendment, including Oliver Letwin, who want to support the deal and want this to progress as quickly as possible. And I'm in that camp. So I think next week we can return to what is the issue of substance, about what the bill is, what it does, where does that leave us. And I think we ought to be able to do that, and I think the government is set fair, in truth, to win the second reading of that, whether it's on Monday or Tuesday.
Just to go to the actual deal itself, I mean, how do you feel it compares to the one that Theresa May managed to negotiate? Do you have any concerns, particularly hearing DUP MPs saying how much they dislike it and think it undermines the union?
I'll be very honest with you. I think the Theresa May deal was a better deal because of the union. But look, we've got to find a way through this. We've got to reach a deal. The Theresa May deal didn't get through the House of Commons. I suspect that the Boris Johnson deal will get through the House of Commons at second reading next week. And although it is not perfect, and I think there are things that we want to scrutinise, that there are aspects of it that I think we need to properly understand, I think leaving with a good deal is still the best outcome for the country.
David Gork, thank you very much indeed. So we'll try to work out exactly what that vote would mean on Monday. But I think very interesting that for quite a lot of MPs, if that delay to Brexit, if that letter has been sent by the Prime Minister, and that is there as an insurance policy against leaving without a deal at the end of October, a lot might be more favourable and they might vote for Boris Johnson's deal in whatever form it comes next week.
Vicky, thanks very much again. Thanks to Mr. Gork as well. Back here on the green outside Parliament, what I'd like to do is take a look at Parliament Square, which is not too far away. And there we have Sir Ed Davey from the Lib Dems speaking in the big rally, I suppose, the big campaign rally in favour of a second referendum, a people's vote. Let's listen for a second.
Campaign. A certain Boris Johnson. Do you remember him? Do you remember what he said? He said you could vote leave and we'd still stay in the single market. Can we believe anything our Prime Minister says? He does not have the mandate for this deal. He does not have the mandate for Brexit. And that's why we need a final say. And we will campaign with you all the way to get that final say. And when we do, we've got to do two things. First of all, we've got to reach out to our Leave brothers and sisters. Because if there's one thing that this whole thing has taught us, is that we live in a country that's too unfair and too unequal, and we must work together to tackle that inequality. And when we come
Sir Ed Davey there, Sir Ed Davey for the Lib Dems, who's just one of many speakers at the rally that's taking place in Parliament Square. Earlier on, John McDonnell for Labour, and we also had Sam Gyimah, the former Conservative MP, and that's the Lib Dems' Ed Davey there speaking. So a big crowd of thousands of people who've come down Whitehall to Parliament itself, making the case for a second referendum because they feel that that is the right approach, though, of course, as we know, Boris Johnson and majority of Conservative MPs, indeed, the House of Commons has voted against that option itself. So anyway, that's the substance of today's demonstration here around the Houses of Parliament. What I'd like to do now, before I have another chat with the panel, is to look beyond Westminster and talk to our editors and correspondents across the UK and in Ireland. And I'm going to start with Sarah Smith, our Scotland editor, who's in Glasgow. And Sarah, given that the SNP, of course, have played such a very important parliamentary role in this process, where does today leave the SNP as a party, but more importantly, where does it leave the Scottish Government's approach to the Brexit episode?
Well, the Scottish Government will be very pleased with this. I spoke to the First Minister about Brexit and about the process earlier this week and asked her if she really believed she could still stop Brexit. And she said while we remain members of the European Union, she's going to do everything she can to try and stop us from leaving. And although it's a slim hope, she admits she thinks there's still that possibility. That's what the SNP would ultimately like to see. And of course, they say if they can't get the whole of the UK to remain in the EU, then Scotland should be allowed to have a referendum about about becoming independent and Scotland rejoining the EU. The thing to remember, of course, about this whole Brexit debate in Scotland is that it looks rather different here, because you hear politicians across the UK going on and on and on about how we have to respect the result of the referendum, that the will of the people has to be honoured. Well, the will of the people in Scotland when they voted in that EU referendum was to remain. 62% voted to remain. So that argument doesn't cut quite the same ice here, and instead what you have is the SNP repeatedly making the case that Scotland is being dragged out of the EU against its will, and that that's anti-democratic, as well as potentially doing damage, they say, to the Scottish economy. And they're using that argument not only to say Brexit should be stopped, but also to stoke up the idea that Westminster's not listening to what Scotland wants, that this system of the United Kingdom, where all four nations are supposed to work together in their common interests, that simply doesn't work, that Brexit shows the Westminster system is broken, they argue, and that means that they keep talking about wanting another independence referendum and think that all of this chaos in Westminster is furthering their cause for that.
Sarah, good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Sarah Smith with the latest there for us in Glasgow. Let's go to Belfast and talk to our island correspondent there, Chris Page. And Chris, you know, we heard some very, very strong contributions today from the DUP, who've really made life very difficult for Boris Johnson, certainly in today's votes and previous to that, given their view of the deal that he struck. What's the view in Northern Ireland across other parties as well about what's happened today?
Yeah, well, as you say, Hugh, there may only be 11 MPs from Northern Ireland who take their seats in the House of Commons, but their votes were of critical importance today. The 10 DUP MPs voting for the Let Win amendment, also the only non-DUP MP who takes their seat in the Commons, the independent unionist Lady Sylvia Herman, also voting in favour of the Let Win amendment. So they're all of a view that the deal needs to be scrutinised, that it breaches unionist bottom lines, it drives a wedge between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. As far as the wider political picture in Northern Ireland goes, well, the other parties will say that the DUP don't speak for the majority of people in Northern Ireland. They'll go back to the 2016 referendum and remind people that 56% of people here voted to stay in the European Union. So the DUP was alone amongst the major Northern Ireland parties in wanting Brexit to happen. Now, Sinn Féin, of course, the biggest Irish nationalist party, they will point to the events at Westminster and say that they're frankly farcical, and they'll say the way to move forward, the way for Northern Ireland to move forward, will be for there to be another referendum, but this time on Irish unity. Now, that is unlikely to happen, certainly in the near future, but Sinn Féin are very much viewing all these events around Brexit, all the uncertainty in Parliament, as a way to push forward their United Ireland argument. As far as the DUP is concerned, well, you can be sure they'll try to use their negotiating leverage to the max over the next few days, and in particular, the primary issue for them, I think, over the last few days has become the issue of democratic consent. They wanted the Stormont Assembly, the devolved assembly here in Northern Ireland, to have an upfront vote on the new arrangements for Northern Ireland for Brexit. The deal that Boris Johnson proposed did include a vote for Stormont, but only 4 years after those new arrangements came into force. So the DUP's view is that if Stormont was given an upfront vote, well, that could solve a lot of their objections. One huge problem with that, of course, is that the Stormont Assembly hasn't sat for 2.5 years because of the political deadlock, the disagreements between the DUP and their former power-sharing partner Sinn Féin, and the complicated politics of Brexit are just making the complexities of politics here in Belfast all the more difficult.
Indeed, Chris, thank you for the overview there and the analysis for us from Belfast. Chris Page there for us. I want to go live to Dublin because our correspondent Keith Doyle is outside the Taoiseach's headquarters there. And Keith, I suppose, you know, this deal that Boris Johnson struck was because he'd basically come to a new agreement with the Taoiseach in the talks that they had in the past week or so. So how will today's vote in the Commons be seen there in Dublin?
Yes, well, as you say, Leo Varadkar was instrumental in getting that deal between the UK and the EU. You know, Leo Varadkar said that today everyone in Ireland would have eyes only for the House of Commons and on rugby. Well, certainly for the first half of the day, I have to say most Irish interests were on rugby. The result of that was very disappointing as Ireland got knocked out of the Rugby World Cup. So disappointment there. And then for the Irish government, certainly disappointment at what happened in the Commons this afternoon. Now, of course, Ireland did not want Brexit, does not want Brexit, but the fact that it's happening, the Irish government did want this deal to go through. As you say, this deal was in part helped and facilitated by Leo Varadkar. Now, he tried to help Boris Johnson last night and yesterday. He said he appealed to unionists to vote for this. He said that this deal would not undermine the constitutional position of Northern Ireland or unionism. He said the Queen would still be the Queen, the pound would still be the pound, and people in Northern Ireland would still be posting letters through the Royal Mail in red postboxes. Now, that didn't go down too well with some unionists, certainly some members of the DUP, but obviously it didn't help. Now that this vote has been suspended, has been delayed, that will be disappointing for the Irish government. As to what happens next, well, Leo Varadkar said yesterday that Plan B is no deal. Now, that is the very last thing that the Irish government wants. So now what are we looking at? An extension. Leo Varadkar said, well, the Irish government would be open to an extension, but he did warn that that may not be the case for the other members of the EU. So like everyone else, it's a watching and waiting game and to see how things develop in Westminster.
Keith, many thanks again. Keith Doyle there with the latest in Dublin and the latest thoughts on what the Taoiseach and the Irish government will be making of today's vote here at Westminster. Let's go live to Cardiff and let's talk to my colleague Howell Griffith, who is outside the Senedd in Cardiff Bay. And Howell, I'm just wondering, because of course if you go back 3.5 years, Wales did vote to leave the EU, so that's been a prime feature of the debate in Wales. What will the Welsh Government be making then of what's happened today here?
Well, within minutes of that vote coming through here, the Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford tweeted pretty plainly what he thought, that the PM must now obey the law and request an extension to avoid a no-deal Brexit. But the Labour policy here in Wales is slightly, well, dare I say, clearer than the Westminster Party. He says that there should be another amendment, a second vote, and in that vote that Welsh Labour would campaign to remain within the EU. So the First Minister Mark Drakeford making pretty plain, if one amendment can succeed, he thinks there should be another one which opens up the thought of another EU referendum. Now, although he leads the Welsh Labour Party, he doesn't lead a party with one voice. We've also heard from Stephen Kinnock, who's in the chamber. We learned that he voted for this amendment. Now, he's been a key voice because he's been one of those leaders of the MPs for a deal. No one was certain which way he'd go if it came to a meaningful vote. He now has a few more days to make up his mind, but he said that he voted for this amendment because he wanted more time to scrutinise the Johnson plan. There has been some concern here in Wales as to what it would mean, particularly with that border being in the sea between Ireland and Wales. Could potentially fewer freight lorries come to Wales because it would mean difficult, time-consuming customs checks. But as you said, that's the politicians' view. The view of the people here, polling suggests, has remained that they want Brexit to be sorted, so this possibility of a further delay won't necessarily go down well.
Howell, thanks very much again. Howell Griffith, our correspondent at the Senedd in Cardiff Bay, with thoughts on the Welsh Government's response to the vote today. Now, one of the most prominent supporters of the Brexit process in Parliament is the former Conservative leader, Ian Duncan-Smith, and he's with Vicky N now.
Yeah, that's right, and really trying to mull over what has happened today and maybe more importantly what should happen next. Things are moving pretty quickly. There's talk now of a vote on Monday. Jacob Rees-Mogg, the leader of the House, announcing that, although no one's entirely sure in what form it will be. Anyway, let's try and talk about that with Ian Duncan-Smith, as you say, former Conservative leader. So just first of all, to go back over today, we didn't actually get to a vote on the deal. You would have voted for it, though.
I would have done. I think the thing I'm picking up from out there, Remain or Leave, if they just had enough. They want us to get this done, and I'm astonished by the kind of anger that's beginning to boil up. For God's sake, get it done. So they're turning their attention on Parliament. So I think today was a bad day for us because we had the numbers to get it done. Had Oliver Letman not produced this last-minute amendment, which basically emasculated the motion and meant we couldn't move it. I gather, however, I hope, going forward, that the European Union may well take a view which says, look, you're not going to get an extension, just get the damn bill through.
So if that were to happen, the Prime Minister either writes a letter or doesn't, but if there is no delay, or if it were to be vetoed by one country, that kind of changes the dynamic quite a bit, doesn't it?
It changes it completely, because that means that there is no place to go for those who want to delay it, because their delay then would end up in a no deal. So the important thing now is you need some compression to focus minds in there, that now you better pay attention in getting this deal through, otherwise we will go to no deal. I want a deal, I think most people in there want a deal, and therefore it's time to vote for it. And so if a motion comes on Monday and it's clear from the European Union that they do not want to give us an extension, certainly not at this point anyway, then there's no point in an amendment. So in which case we can get straight to the motion. I think we have the numbers to win the motion. That's the irony. We could have won that motion even without the DUP's backing.
Does that mean that it's possible that the bill that needs to go through, the withdrawal agreement bill, could that get through by the 31st of October? A lot of MPs will say that that isn't the scrutiny that's needed on something that's so important.
Well, no, you can have plenty of scrutiny. We need to timetable it, obviously, so it's because otherwise people who don't want to get it through will delay it. But you know, this House can sit as long as it likes. I mean, I would advise the Prime Minister, go round the clock. Just go round the clock, keep everybody here, let's get this damn thing. You can have as much debate time as you like, but you're just not going to go to bed. We're going to do this thing, maybe an hour or two. I mean, it's that important, just do it. Now, we've done that before on big legislation, and then chuck it back to the Lords, tell the Lords to do the same. I think we can get it through. We've got roughly 2 weeks. Work through the weekend, next weekend as well. We're not going to go anywhere next weekend. We're going to stay here Saturday and Sunday. Sorry about that. But we just get it done. That's the way to do it.
Just looking at the deal itself, you had some reservations about it, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I was concerned a bit about the consent issue in Northern Ireland. Very concerned about how we get the next 14 months done once we go into the implementation period without being damaged by the EU. We're going to put some sovereignty clauses in, I gather, into the bill, which help protect us on that. And, you know, the government's guaranteed 14 months, we're going to go hard for it, we're going to get the free trade deal. So I'm satisfied.
So the end point of the free trade deal is what sort of...
Exactly right, yeah, very much so. That's what we need.
Okay, Ian Duncan-Smith, thank you very much indeed. So looking ahead there to if this bill were to get through, and of course then people start to look ahead at what the future relationship with the EU will be like. But that's probably for another day, Hugh.
Vicky, thank you very much. Vicky Young there in the Houses of Parliament with Ian Duncan-Smith, the former Conservative leader. Well, the time is precisely 4 o'clock on this BBC News special from Westminster on the day that MPs have voted to build in another delay to the Brexit process, in effect, by backing a very important amendment presented by the MP Sir Oliver Letwin, which really does cause a big headache for the Prime Minister, because what the MPs have decided is that they will not approve the Prime Minister's Brexit deal until all the legislation attached to it actually is passed. That clearly presents the government with a problem. Let's look at the numbers in terms of the vote that happened a short while ago. We got the result just before 3 o'clock. 322 MPs voting for the Letwin Amendment, which withholds parliamentary approval, as I said, of the Brexit deal until the legislation is passed. A majority of 16, therefore, as you can see, which in this House of Commons, which is very tightly balanced, is a pretty decent majority. And the role of the DUP of Northern Ireland, the Democratic Unionist Party, was crucial in the outcome of that vote. So I'm going to reintroduce my panel. They've moved around a bit with us, and we're still here with Kevin Maguire of the Daily Mirror, Laura Hughes of the Financial Times, and Hannah White of the Institute for Government. And we've had a day which has been relatively peaceful until now, we might say. So, but some of the protesters are back with us, but I think they're making their case, as they have done for many months. For viewers just joining us, let's underline the significance of what we've had today and what this vote means, what it means for the government in terms of its own plans next week, and what it means for the Brexit process and delivering it as the Prime Minister wants to do. So how would you describe that to viewers?
Hugely frustrating for the Prime Minister, because when you actually look at the numbers today, it is not impossible that if it had been an up-down vote on his deal as it stands, he might have got that through. So he is now facing the prospect of writing this letter to the EU, admitting to extending Article 50, which he has repeatedly said and said today that he won't do. This is just a huge obstacle, because now he's going to have to put his bill through Parliament, where it will be scrutinised, where people will seek to amend it, and it's just a bit of a nightmare for him. It's not impossible, and I still believe Number 10 think that it's possible to get this through by the end of October. But going into tomorrow in the Sunday papers, they are not going to want headlines that says, you know, Boris Johnson forced to request extension to Article 50.
And I think what it shows is just how low trust is in Parliament. That Number 10 would say they're frustrated with Oliver Letwin for having brought forward this amendment, but the fact that he's felt he's needed to, and that very senior former Conservative politicians have felt the need to support it, is because they just don't trust the Prime Minister when he says, if I get this vote through, I want to leave with a deal by the 31st of October. They still think there's a risk of a no deal.
Yes, that's interesting, isn't it? And Kevin, what would you say to viewers about what's happened?
Boris Johnson called the first Saturday sitting of Parliament for 37 years, since the Falklands War in 1982, because he thought it would be a great victory. It would be a platform for him to get his Brexit plan through. And it's completely backfired. It's blown up in his face. It's a Saturday shambles for him. He's lost authority again. And there is no master plan. In truth, we see that time after time after time. He thought he'd get the general election. Labour were wanting, and Labour didn't walk into his trap. He thought he could sideline Parliament. He failed, lost in the Supreme Court, was embarrassed the Queen. And now he's had this setback, which effectively rules out no deal, requires, as Laura said, for him to send the letter he never said he would send. It was always going to be do or die in a ditch on Halloween. Brexit happens or it doesn't. Very difficult for him now to get through his legislation in Parliament to make that all happen. And politics is about momentum. And if he'd have won today, he would have had some momentum. But he hasn't got it. Instead, he's rather deflated yet again.
When we spoke to Katja Adler earlier in Brussels, she said, well, the Commission says they'll wait for communication from the British government. She said they won't be in a rush to respond. They have until the 31st of October. Are we all assuming, despite some noises off, that the EU will agree to an extension when they get the letter?
I think the EU, as ever, is now reconciled to the fact, as someone said to me in Brussels, that the UK wants to jump out of the window, but they don't want to be accused at any point of having pushed us. I think that's the risk for them. They don't want the blame game to start and for people to say, well, if only you'd granted that extension, something different could have happened.
I suspect the EU would like the outline agreement to be implemented and take place. But if it doesn't, of course, they want the UK, if we leave, to go with the deal too. It's in their interest. So I think they would grant that extension. Now, Boris Johnson chose his words very carefully in Parliament when he was responding to his defeat, and he said he wouldn't negotiate that extension. That doesn't mean you don't send the letter. It just means you send it and then you don't bang on their door, ring their bell, bang the table, demand that you get that extension now. You wait and see. He always has hope on his side, and he will try and get that legislation through the Commons, but he has a majority of minus 40-something in the House of Commons. He hasn't got a majority in the House of Lords. All sorts of amendments are going to be put down, no doubt, for a fresh referendum to get the economic impact assessments on what this deal would mean for the UK. It's extraordinary. MPs could have voted for a deal and they don't know what the impact is going to be on the economy with the Treasury not releasing. So he's really in trouble now.
The EU don't want to have to extend. They want this over and done with. But more importantly, they don't want a no-deal Brexit. So they are going to grant an extension. There have been some comments from the French president that were helpful to Boris Johnson over the last few days. Then, they really said we don't see why you need an extension. We've got the deal. Now come on, get it through Parliament. But they're not going to ultimately be left responsible for a no-deal Brexit, so they will extend it. Could they maybe extend it for less time? Could they say, we'll extend it till you get the legislation through and help Boris Johnson in that way? But crucially, he doesn't want Sunday front page stories tomorrow that have a picture of him writing a letter requesting this extension.
Let's help viewers with next week, Monday, Tuesday, and what Jacob Rees-Mogg, the leader of the House, has announced today, which is in effect what we call a meaningful vote, kind of thing we were expecting today, probably on Monday. Now, what are the stakes here? And start with you, Kevin. What does that mean?
Yeah, they're incredibly high stakes. Monday, Tuesday of next week was supposed to be the Queen's speech debate and a vote. Almost certainly would have been defeated because he hasn't got that majority. Now, if he attempts to bring back his vote unamended by Oliver Letwin, saying, yes, we agree, the House of Commons, Parliament is going to adopt his plan, then we'll have the legislation, he would have a triumph if he got that through. But the Speaker may yet rule, well, you've already had one go, so you can't bring it back in the same session. We've we've seen this before. So they will now all eyes will be on an interventionist speaker.
Yes, of course.
Who is given the executive a hard time all the way long. He's championed Parliament and the MPs against the government. So they will be fretting in 10 Downing Street that their latest cunning plan doesn't even allow it to go before the House of Commons.
How do we explain the context? I mean, of the thinking in Downing Street as they think about this process, but obviously thinking further ahead towards a potential general election and how they sell this strategy to people, whatever the outcome is. How does Monday fit into that? I mean, what is the purpose politically of Monday?
What has to happen for us to leave with a deal is you have to have a meaningful vote and you have to put the deal into legislation. It is possible that you could use the legislation to say you don't need the meaningful vote, but the government's calculation will be they can't start on the bill until Tuesday at the earliest, because they're going to have the first reading on Monday if that's what they choose to do. They will be trying to frame this to say we are doing everything we possibly can to fulfill our pledge. So if they end up with an election, they can say it wasn't our fault, we were doing as much as we possibly could, and it was Parliament, it was the courts, it was everyone else who stopped us.
We're back to the blame game again.
Exactly, and with this letter, if it gets sent, the Prime Minister will be making very clear that Parliament has sent this letter, that Parliament has caused this delay, and he won't want to take any responsibility for it himself.
Let's have a look at these images of Westminster here, because it's a nice sunny day now. The heavens opened earlier on. The heavens opened, by the way, when the vote happened. I'm not sure whether that was symbolic or not, but now the sun's back out. Palace of Westminster, as you can see, covered in lots of scaffolding and sort of building work going on, because there's a major renovation of Houses of Parliament which is about to start, which will take a decade or more, cost maybe £6 billion, but that's getting underway. And the Elizabeth Tower there, clad in scaffolding. Look at the crowd in Parliament Square. This is the big protest that's been addressed by lots of senior politicians today. This is the demonstration in favour of a second referendum, or a people's vote as they call it. Those people who want this deal, whatever it is, to be put to a vote up and down the UK. And then, of course, depending on your view of what the ballot paper would look like, that Remain should be on it, or that maybe even no deal should be on it. But that's a debate for another day. But the principle of the second vote is what these demonstrators in Parliament Square are gathered for today, and it's a very big demonstration. They made their way down from Trafalgar Square all the way down Whitehall to Parliament Square itself, where the crowd is being overlooked there by such great figures from the past as Winston Churchill and Lloyd George. So there you go, a bit of a political context for you. And one of those addressing the crowd earlier was in fact John McDonnell of Labour, and we've also seen some Lib Dems, including Sir Ed Davey and Sam Gyimah, who is a former Conservative too. So that march is still underway, and they're still listening to some of the speakers there. Earlier we heard from the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, his response to what's been going on, because we heard a response in the Commons from the dispatch box. So this is what Mr Corbyn had to say a short while ago.
It's yet another defeat for the government. They brought their case to Parliament. We had an amendment by Oliver Letwin which was successful to essentially prevent the government taking us out of the EU without a deal.
And what do you think should happen now?
I think we should now have the opportunity to scrutinise what the government's plans are on this, but primarily, of course, the Prime Minister must acknowledge that he will abide by the Benn Act and make sure we do not crash out without a deal. And therefore, there has to be an application for an extension.
He seemed to imply in the House that he wasn't going to ask for an extension. If he doesn't ask for an extension, what do you think the Commons should do?
Well, the Commons are going to come back to the issue on Monday, and I hope the Commons on Monday will reiterate its view that we do not support or agree with the proposals he's brought back, the agreement he's brought back, and ensure that there is no crash out.
If he doesn't write the letter, or even if he does potentially, is it now time, as some people seem to have suggested, for the opposition to table a motion of no confidence in the government?
We will do that when the time is right to do it, but our priority is to prevent this country leaving on the 31st without a deal. And as I pointed out in my statement to the House this morning, that this deal that Boris Johnson has with the EU is not acceptable. Parliament has clearly not accepted it today because of the damage it would do to jobs as well as to consumer and environmental and working rights in this country. And so until we're absolutely clear that there will be no crash out of the European Union without any agreement, then we will make sure the House is still sitting to hold the government to account.
If the government does ask for an extension, will you then, say it's to the end of January, and they say they want an election, will you then whip to vote for an election as you said you would before?
When we're clear there's going to be no crashing out, then obviously that's the next stage for us, and we're the only party that would go into an election campaign that's very clear of the terms of an agreement we would seek to negotiate with the EU, the 5 pillars that I've often outlined, and put that to a referendum within 6 months of that government coming into office. So the people will get a choice between an arrangement with the European Union which protects our trade and our rights, but is put alongside a Remain and reform option.
Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, talking to us just a short while ago. I mentioned the fact that there were thousands of demonstrators in Parliament Square, and indeed just behind us too, who want a second referendum. They are, and lots of them of course, are very, very opposed to the Brexit process itself. Some days here we've had far more people representing the pro-Brexit view. Today it's rather different. Many more people here who are unhappy with the Brexit process, and indeed the sight of some cabinet ministers is enough to drive them rather angry. Feelings are running high on both sides, as we know. Andrea Leadsom and Jacob Rees-Mogg, both cabinet ministers, have experienced a bit of that today after the vote. Let's look at this. This was Andrea Leadsom a little earlier with a police escort leaving the Houses of Parliament. People shouting "shame on you" as she passed. And we've seen different instances of this kind of behaviour in the past. Indeed, on both sides of the debate on Brexit. So lots of anger in the crowd there today. But Andrea Leadsom being escorted by police from the Commons just a short while ago. In a few moments I'll talk to the former Conservative Cabinet Minister Stephen Crabb, who's joining me, but let's just rejoin Vicky once again in Central Lobby.
Yeah, and as you say, those people who are advocating another referendum, a lot of them out campaigning today, and with me is Peter Kyle, Labour MP, who is backing just that. We didn't get to your amendment today for various reasons we won't go into. What other chances have you got now to try and bring about another referendum, which is what you've been campaigning for?
We need to be really clear on this. We didn't get to the referendum today because the Prime Minister chose not to put it to the vote. And he chose not to put his own deal to the vote. It's his decision, not anyone else's. So this is not Parliament buying more time. It's not Parliament refusing to do its job. Parliament actually was chomping at the bit, really wanted to get stuck into both of these issues today. It was the Prime Minister that pulled them. So coming forward, we're going forward. We know that there's lots of opportunities coming in the next few days. We know there'll be a motion presented on Parliament again, the same one that the government pulled today. So they're going to be playing games again and pulling it from today and putting it in on Monday. We know that legislation will follow. So there'll be lots of opportunities for us to give the full debate and allow people to express their views and then have the final vote on it when the Prime Minister allows us to in the coming days. We'll find the right time to do it. It's always been a compromise. We've always wanted to work with MPs from across the whole House. And if people on Monday want to focus on one thing and it not be this, then we'll give them that opportunity and we'll respect it. But we will find the right time, probably in the next week.
But, we've been hearing this a lot, haven't we? And lots of people are saying you've been running away from holding a vote on it here in the House because you know you don't have the numbers for another referendum.
Absolutely not the truth. We've pushed this to the vote back in March, and we were defeated by 12. The Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, was defeated that same week by 58. So we are still the proposition, the single proposition for Brexit that has got closest to forming a majority. Now, today, the Prime Minister saw where the mood of the House was. He saw where the numbers were. He was defeated on one completely procedural issue, which all it was trying to do was make sure we don't crash out if his legislation doesn't get completed. Exactly what the Prime Minister says his own intentions are. And then when he saw what the number...
He didn't back the deal. That was the trouble. The amendment meant that the motion, as amended, actually just said, look, we've looked at this, but we're withholding our support until the legislation goes through. So it didn't, fulfil the Benn Act, of getting rid of that.
No, that's actually not correct. All that the legislation did was said that should the legislation fall or stumble, we can't fall out of the EU by accident. The Prime Minister said he doesn't want that to happen. The Commons has said it doesn't want this to happen. We all agree on it, but the Prime Minister won't allow us to put the measures in just to ensure that it doesn't happen. Nothing in the Letwin amendment stopped us leaving on the 31st if the Prime Minister could get his legislation through. What we see, though, is a Prime Minister that's actually acting in a really petulant way. If he sees the numbers aren't going right, he runs away from the debate. So we're now going to have precisely the same debate again on Monday, and we know full well if he thinks the numbers aren't going to go his way, he'll pull it again.
He has got the numbers, because there are lots of people around here who think that actually there were enough of your colleagues willing to back that deal.
He's just been defeated by 16 on something that he said was an essential issue.
We know that there are, for example, former Tories who didn't vote for that, who would vote for his deal.
Well, we will only find out when we actually have the vote. I wanted to have the vote tonight. I'm not blocking it. I wanted to have the vote on the referendum tonight. And if the vote passed for his deal, I wanted us to get stuck into the legislation first thing on Monday. Incidentally, the Queen was dragged to Parliament just 10 days ago because he said we needed a full legislative programme for government. Where's that gone now? We're supposed to be debating that next week and voting on it Monday and Tuesday. He's swept that aside now. And again, it wasn't Parliament that made him do it. It was Boris Johnson running away from having the key votes tonight. And it's really important that people recognise this, because we want to have the resolution of whether we're going to have a referendum or not. We want to have the resolution as to whether his deal is fit for our country or not, so that we can move forward in an orderly way.
Okay, Peter Cull, thank you very much indeed. So that's the view of those who want another referendum attached to whatever deal there may or may not be approved by this place.
Vicky, thanks very much again. Thanks to your guest as well. It's 19 minutes past 4. With me is the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, Stephen Crabb. Thank you very much for joining us, Stephen. Direct question, how did you vote in this for this amendment? Against? For?
I voted against the Letwin Amendment.
Right. Why is that?
Because I thought that it was prolonging the confusion and the uncertainty around Brexit. Look, we came here with a job to do, to provide some greater clarity and a sense of go forward for our nation after 3 years when the House of Commons has basically gone round in circles chasing its tail on Brexit. Today we had an opportunity to break that deadlock, and we fudged it again. That amendment got in the way of it, and the fact that there are MPs walking around in circles tonight asking each other what on earth happens next week just shows that the fog of confusion continues to hang over this whole place.
Prime Minister was very clear. He said, I'm pressing on. I don't regard this, he said, as a major setback, even though it's been portrayed as that by others, and that he wants to see Brexit happening by the end of the month. Now, is that remotely possible now that the Commons has decided that the legislation has to go through first before it gives its approval?
It is possible, and the House of Commons has shown several times in its history that when it needs to and when there's a will, it can pass major pieces of legislation, sensitive pieces of legislation, very quickly indeed. Look, that is no reason why the House of Commons shouldn't be sitting all night if necessary, if we're to kind of honour Brexit and get this legislation through. But the Prime Minister's right to stick to his guns. You know, we had an opportunity that was missed today to provide a straight yes-no vote on the deal that many people thought he wouldn't be able to negotiate with the EU. He's brought back what I think is a very reasonable set of compromises in a Brexit package, and I think he's right to stick to his guns and make the House of Commons have that yes-no vote on it.
So Monday will bring another opportunity, according to the Leader of the House, for what we call a meaningful vote. What are the stakes then involved in that?
Well, the stakes are huge, and as they have been throughout this, you know, and Boris Johnson as Prime Minister has played a very high-risk game. You know, many people thought that he would play it with bravado and be the tough no-deal Prime Minister. He's proved them wrong by being the compromise Prime Minister, the pragmatic Prime Minister, and that's how he's going to intend to carry on with this. And look, if we get to a general election and the opposition to Brexit, the forces that are opposing Brexit continue to get in the way, I am very comfortable going into a general election with a Prime Minister who's proved that he's willing to compromise and be flexible on this.
Final point, Stephen. You know, when you talk to your constituents and they say to you, are we going to see Brexit by the end of October? With confidence, what do you say to them? Can you say to them with full kind of energy and full commitment, you know, yes, it should happen, and there's no reason why it can't happen? Following today's vote, what will you say to them?
Well, all I can do is carry on doing what I've been doing, which is promising them that I will give my 100% commitment to getting it done by a certain date. Look, my track record on Brexit is very well known in my constituency. People know that I've argued consistently for a deal that protects industries like farming and oil refining that are important in West Wales, but also treats Northern Ireland sensitively. And one of the reasons that I'm backing Boris Johnson's deal is that even more so than Theresa May's deal, it does treat Northern Ireland with the kind of sensitivity that I think that it deserves.
OK, Stephen Crabb, good to talk to you. Thank you very much. The former Conservative Cabinet Minister there, Stephen Crabb, our thanks to him for joining us. Let's join Vicky once again back in the Houses of Parliament, because I think you have the leader of the Lib Dems with you, Vicky, yes?
Yeah, that's right. Things have thinned out here a little bit. The action has stopped in the chamber. We'll be back here on Monday, no doubt, to do it all again. Let's speak to Jo Swinson, the Liberal Democrat leader. People watching this from outside will wonder what on earth has been achieved by today. What's happened is that you haven't had a meaningful vote on anything.
Well, what we need to make sure is that we don't have the risk of crashing out without a deal, and people frankly don't have much faith in the Prime Minister's reassurances on this. We had a Conservative MP yesterday talking about he was backing the Prime Minister's deal because it gave the option to have a no-deal crash out in 14 months' time. Therefore, what we had today was the House of Commons voting on an amendment that means that the Prime Minister will have to send that letter to request an extension to Article 50, and that will enable us to have some time to deal with this in a way that is not rushed. Now, as a Lib Dem, obviously I want to stop Brexit. I think that remaining in the EU is the best possible deal, and I will use that time and argue that we should have a people's vote and let the public have the final say on this Brexit deal. Hundreds of thousands of people marching in London today just for that very cause of having a people's vote. But there are many people who have slightly different views who also were concerned that there's no economic analysis, impact assessments of the Prime Minister's deal that the government have put forward that are updated as a result of what negotiations have happened. And so that
still go through by the 31st of October, couldn't it?
Well, I mean, even with what has been agreed today, then there's a bill that the Prime Minister could bring forward, but they need to request that extension of Article 50 because we are currently on the date that is specified in legislation, and by law, the Prime Minister has not secured support for a deal. He has not secured support for a no deal, and so he has to write that letter to the President of the European Council.
And if the EU don't grant an extension?
Well, my understanding from discussions with people in Brussels is that they will grant an extension. And so then that gives us the time and the space that we need, in my case, to argue that we should have a people's vote, because I think that is the best way to resolve this, rather than some kind of rushed decision in Parliament. Let the public have a look at the deal. And look, this deal is bad for the NHS, it's bad for jobs, bad for the economy, and that's why people need to have the right to reject it and choose to remain in the European Union.
OK, Jo Swinson, thank you very much indeed. A very clear view there from the leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Vicky, many thanks again. Thanks to you and to Jo Swinson too. As we approach the end of this broadcast, just a quick word with our reality check correspondent Chris Morris. And Chris, just let's tell viewers what they can expect now in the proceedings here next week.
Well, one thing we're going to see is the withdrawal agreement bill, which is the massive piece of legislation which is supposed to turn the withdrawal agreement into UK law. And more difficulties for the government there. They haven't got this vote done today, but the withdrawal agreement bill in detail will have to set out how, for example, government ministers would pay money to the EU as part of the divorce bill, which many Tory MPs don't like. It would tell us how exactly the sort of controversial elements of this new Northern Ireland protocol are actually going to be implemented. So at every step of the way there are potential elephant traps in there for the government. Don't forget, we've also got at the same time the Queen's speech. All that debate's going on. So there's all sorts of different legislative things which have to happen. On Monday, we might have another go at a vote. It's not clear. John Bercow's going to make that clear when Parliament resumes again. But today wasn't really all that super Saturday, was it? And on we go.
Chris, good to talk to you again, and we'll talk again later. Thanks very much. Chris Morris there with some final thoughts for us on this day here at Westminster. And it brings us to the end of our special coverage here today on this Saturday. And for viewers around the world, thanks for joining us on the day that the House of Commons sat on a Saturday for the first time in 37 years. MPs delivering a defeat for Boris Johnson and his Brexit agreement, in effect delaying it, backing an amendment forcing him to write to Brussels today, later on asking for that delay. So let's just hear once again how that vote on the amendment went.
The ayes to the right, 322. The noes to the left, 306.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 322. The noes to the left, 306. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, confirming the result of the vote on that amendment. And the result meant that the Prime Minister did not then present his bill for a vote today. He basically decided not to have a vote on his deal because the amendment builds in yet more scrutiny, and government's extremely frustrated and annoyed about the result. Although the Prime Minister tried to make out and said he insisted that it wasn't in his view a massive setback, this is what he had to say.
The best thing for the UK and for the whole of Europe is for us to leave with this new deal on October the 31st. And to anticipate the questions that are coming from the benches opposite, I will not negotiate a delay with the EU, and neither does the law compel me to do so. I will tell our friends and colleagues in the EU exactly what I've told everyone in the last 88 days that I've served as Prime Minister, that further delay would be bad for this country, bad for our European Union, and bad for democracy.
The Prime Minister speaking earlier. That's all from Westminster on this historic day. Our coverage continues on the BBC News Channel and on BBC World News. But for now, thanks for watching and goodbye.